Chapter 698. Impossible. Old Ninth Axion firmly denied, my third brother would never steal master's things. Who would have thought that Lu Yanqing would sigh softly? It was Lao Sen who took away the 10 pots of blood orchid. Axion Laojiu was in the belly of the mountain before, perhaps he did not notice. But Lu Yanqing was in the small manor, and as soon as Axion Lao Sen flew near, she noticed. Axion Lao Sen took away 10 pots of blood orchid. Lu Yanqing felt strange. Although she didn't know the reason, she didn't believe that Axion Lao Sen would do anything against her, so she didn't come out to stop him. Why didn't you stop him when you knew he took the blood orchid? Yu Qianzhou stared at Lu Yanqing and shouted. Axion Laojiu was startled at first, then he frowned and said, Yu Qianzhou, watch your tone. Yu Qianzhou was speechless, he couldn't wait to rush up and give Lu Yanqing 2 slaps. At this time, no matter how beautiful Lu Yanqing was, she became a pile of dog shit in his eyes. However, he knew that he was no match for the two of them, so he suppressed the anger in his heart and said in a deep voice, Senior Lu, something big is going to happen. Lu Yanqing stared at Yu Qianzhou with clear eyes, and there was a trace of doubt in her heart. She seemed to see a trace of disgust in Yu Qianzhou's eyes. She had never seen a man show such a look to her, and did not know when she had offended him. She frowned and said, Yu Qianzhou, what exactly happened between you and third brother? With a gloomy face, Yu Qianzhou gritted his teeth and said, Yan Zhuixing is hiding in your Lingfang Valley. You probably don't know about it yet, do you? Lu Yanqing and Axion Laojiu looked at each other in surprise. The former said strangely, this is not possible. How do you know that Yan Zhuixing is hiding in my Spirit Fang Valley? Although the two of them were surprised, they didn't seem to be disgusted by the fact that Yan Zhuixing was hiding in the Spirit Fang Valley. To the two of them, Yan Zhuixing had no enmity with them and was not involved in anything. So what if he was hiding in the Spirit Fang Valley? Hee hee. Looks like you guys don't care. Good. That's great. Very good. Yu Qianzhou pointed at the two of them and laughed angrily, wishing that he could engrave the word 38 on Lu Yanqing's seemingly beautiful face. Sometimes, beautiful things could be so hateful and unsightly, making people feel even worse. Axion Laojiu's face darkened as he shouted, impudent. Lu Yanqing raised her arm and stopped him from continuing. She said calmly, Yu Qianzhou, if you have anything to say, you can say it. Yu Qianzhou took a deep breath, calmed his emotions, and said slowly, Yan Zhuixing is hiding in your Lingfang Valley to cultivate his demonic arts. His cultivation process is abnormally cruel, and he has sacrificed countless mortal girls' lives. Previously, I accidentally bumped into him and had a huge battle with him. He was severely injured by me and escaped. The 7-star blood orchid is the key to his cultivation of demonic arts. 4 of your disciples have been controlled by his demonic eyes and have become his puppet accomplices. Third brother Axion is one of them. What do you think he wants to do by stealing those 10 pots of blood orchid? What? Lu Yanqing and Axion Laojiu exclaimed at the same time. This time, the two of them could no longer calm down, and were even a little flustered. Yu Qianzhou still felt that the stimulation was not enough, and said with a sneer, I forgot to tell Senior Lu, of your 4 disciples, other than third brother Axion, 3 have already been killed by Yan Zhuixing. If you don't want third brother Axion to die, I advise you to quickly send people to search the entire Lingfang Valley. He has already been seriously injured by me, and I don't think he can escape too far for the time being. What? The two of them exclaimed again. Axion Laojiu lost his composure and said with a trembling voice, You said that Yan Zhuixing killed my 3 brothers. Yu Qianzhou naturally wouldn't admit that he was the one who killed them. He coldly said, I don't know if they were your elder brothers or not. I only heard third Axion call them 5th brother, 6th brother, and 7th brother. Whether they were your elder brothers or not, it's up to you. Xie and Laojiu suddenly turned around and anxiously bowed to Lu Yanqing and begged, "Master, whether it is true or not, please allow me to bring people to search. Bring all the people in the sect that can be used, and be sure to rescue third brother." Lu Yanqing said with a worried face. "Yes." Xie and Laojiu cupped his hands and quickly left. After a while, hundreds of people flew out of Medicine Hut Mountain, and swept into the mountains. Yu Qianqiu withdrew his gaze from the crowd, and stared at Lu Yanqing and said with a sneer, "Senior Lu, don't you think that with the people of your Lingfang Valley, the hope of finding them in the vast mountains is very slim? I think it's better to find more people." The worried Lu Yanqing immediately came back to her senses, and nodded in a panic. "I will contact Wen Lanfeng and ask him to send people." For someone like her who had almost never suffered any disasters, although she had experienced a long time, her ability to cope with sudden changes was really not good. Yu Qianqiu was speechless. Although he heard that this woman had been rejecting Wen Lanfeng, it seemed that when she was in trouble, the first thing she thought of was Wen Lanfeng. However, Yu Qianqiu still felt that this was not safe. He was afraid that they would not be able to catch Yan Juixing if there were less people, so he immediately reminded her again, "Last time, so many people failed to catch Yan Juixing, and Wen Lanfeng's family is also difficult to deal with. I heard that Senior Lu has a wide range of contacts. For the safety of third brother Xan, it's better to invite people who can help." Lu Yanqing did not think too much, and nodded repeatedly, quickly flashed into the small courtyard, and used the communication array to invite people everywhere. Yu Qianqiu. Just as Yu Qianqiu looked down the mountain, he suddenly heard someone calling him. Looking at the sound, he saw Enchantress of Charm and Yan Yu looking at him at the entrance of the courtyard. The two had actually been inside, and as soon as Yu Qianqiu arrived, they knew it was him. However, seeing Lu Yanqing and Xie and Laojiu, two experts of soul formation stage, they did not dare to come over and disturb him. At this time, seeing that the two experts of soul formation stage had left, they appeared and slowly walked over. Seeing that the two women were safe and sound, Yu Qianqiu's mood suddenly improved a lot. In particular, the plain clothes that the two women had changed into, although it covered their graceful bodies, it added a bit of a different kind of charm to them. Seeing this, Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up, and immediately said with a smile, "Are you two used to living here?" The two women nodded, indicating that they were fine. Yan Yu stared at him, a little hesitant to speak. Yu Qianqiu felt a little itchy in his heart, but he deliberately avoided her gaze, all because he did not know what to say. "Is that Yan Juixing really that dangerous?" Enchantress of Charm asked in a rare solemn tone. Obviously, she also heard the conversation between Yu Qianqiu and Lu Yanqing. Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank, his eyes swept across the two's face, and slowly asked, "Have you seen Yan Juixing in Lingfang Valley?" The two shook their heads, and Enchantress of Charm replied, "Other than walking around once when we first arrived, we have been following Senior Lu's side recently, and learned a lot of things. As for Yan Juixing, we have never seen him. But just now, when I heard you mention third brother Xan, I remembered something. Some time ago, he often said that he would bring us to the back mountain to have a look, but because we are women, it is not convenient for us to go with him to that remote place, so we refused. Now that I think about it, this matter is a little suspicious." Yu Qianqiu nodded, and immediately let out a sigh of relief. It seemed that his worry was right. Yan Juixing really wanted to make a move on the two women through third brother Xan. Fortunately, the two of them had always been by Lu Yanqing's side, and did not give Yan Juixing a chance to make a move, otherwise, the consequences would be unimaginable. Although that guy was seriously injured by me and escaped, there are some things that need to be prepared in advance. Yu Qianqiu solemnly reminded, "If you meet him, do not hold any hope, and immediately run as far as you can, especially when his eyes are glowing red. Especially when his eyes are glowing red, immediately avoid them. Do not look at them, or your mind will be controlled by him and you will become his puppet." The two women's faces changed, and they looked at each other with goosebumps. Enchantress of Charm asked again, "Is Yen Juixing really that scary?" "That guy's devil art is very strange. I reckon that no cultivator below the soul-forming stage can be his opponent. Last night, he met me, so it was his bad luck." Yu Qianqiu reminded the two again, "Do not hold any hope, you did not see it with your own eyes, so you can't imagine how terrifying his devil art is. He was even able to come back to life and escape after being killed by me once. In short, you are definitely not his opponent. Third brother Axayan and his senior brothers are all experts at the end of the tribulation passing stage, so you must learn from them. They can come back to life after dying." The two women were shocked by his words, and immediately paid attention to it, and immediately agreed. The three of them then stood at the edge of the flat platform, facing the rising sun as they chatted idly. The mountain path in the distance was shrouded by the rising mist, and they could vaguely see many people heading towards the Spirit Fong Valley. After Yu Qianqiu noticed, he stretched out his hand and pointed, and asked curiously, "What are those people doing?" Enchantress of Charm giggled, and explained, "They are the poor people of the nearby countries, because Spirit Fong Valley can treat people for free, they all come to seek medical advice." Yu Qianqiu slightly frowned. At this time, Lu Yanqing walked out of the manor, and Enchantress of Charm and Yan Yu immediately bowed and greeted, "Senior Lu." However, Yu Qianqiu pointed to the mountain path in the distance, and said to Lu Yanqing, "Senior Lu, shouldn't you stop practicing medicine for a while? I'm afraid that the commotion here will shock the world." "Okay," Lu Yanqing said in a daze. Only then did she realize that there was no one to command her, and they had all gone into the mountains to find someone. After Yu Qianqiu glanced at them, he raised his eyebrows, turned to Enchantress of Charm and Yan Yu, and said, "Persuade the people who came to go back, and if you can't persuade them to go back, then directly show your skills and rush back. Think of a way to seal the mountain path, and set up a monument. Spirit Fong Valley has something important to do, and the valley will be sealed for a month." He did not need Lu Yanqing's consent, and directly helped her make the decision. Hearing this, the two women were speechless, thinking that this guy was too bold, and could not help but look at Lu Yanqing. Lu Yanqing looked at Yu Qianqiu, and seeing that he was so determined, she nodded. Only then did the two women quickly fly away. There were only two people left on the mountain plateau, and Yu Qianqiu indifferently stared at the woman beside him and asked, "Senior Lu, how is the helper you found?" Although he called her senior, there was no respect that should be given to a senior. Lu Yanqing was not in the mood to pay attention to this at this time, and her bright eyes swept over the empty Spirit Fong Valley. Her heart became more anxious, and she sighed softly, "When Lan Feng has already brought people here, as for the others, I'm afraid they won't come for the time being." Yu Qianqiu was stunned, and felt that something was wrong. Could it be that those greedy people did not want to rob Yen Juixing of the peerless cultivation method? He said in surprise, "Could it be that something big happened in the cultivation world again?" Lu Yanqing looked at him curiously, and her black eyebrows slightly furrowed. "The opening of the East Holy Land is in the near future, and no one can be sure of the specific day. Maybe it will be a few days earlier, maybe it will be a few days later, anyway, it will definitely be within this month. At this time, no one wants to make any big movements, for fear of causing trouble for themselves, and many people have already rushed to the East Sea in advance, preparing to respectfully send by Changchun to the East Holy Land." Chapter 699. Yu Qianqiu was stunned on the spot. How could he forget such a big thing? For a long time, he had been worrying about a lot of things, but there was one place that he didn't need to worry about. That was naturally the Demon Ghost Domains by Changchun. The old guy was so awesome that he didn't need to worry about him at all. Because he was used to not having to do anything, he really forgot. However, he had some doubts in his heart. The old guy was going to leave, why didn't he tell me? It shouldn't be. The two of them stopped talking. Lu Yanqing quietly looked at the unpredictable expression on his face. Suddenly, she remembered the scene of this guy pointing fingers at her. He was really impolite, not giving her any face at all. And she didn't know what happened to her, but she listened to him in a daze. A trace of anger flashed across Lu Yanqing's face. Then, she looked at Yu Qianqiu. She was angry, but she was also curious. This guy clearly had the biggest backing in the world, but he never revealed it. Otherwise, who in the cultivation world would dare to provoke him? How could he be chased everywhere? These two master and disciple were both strange people. Two figures flew back. The return of the 100-charm beauty and Yan Yu made the two of them come back to their senses. The 100-charm beauty looked at the two of them suspiciously. She seemed to have seen Lu Yanqing staring at Yu Qianqiu. This was nothing, but when she saw her and Yan Yu return, she looked away in a panic, giving people a feeling of guilt. Why did it feel a little ambiguous? Is everything done? Yu Qianqiu looked at the two women and asked. The 100-charm beauty smiled and said, yes. Yu Qianqiu paused, then suddenly cupped his hands towards Lu Yanqing and said, Senior Lu, I have something to do first. I will leave the two of them to you. Lu Yanqing nodded slightly. In her heart, she had already guessed where he was going. Yu Qianqiu then said to the two women, here, you'd better not run around. It's safer to follow Senior Lu. After saying that, he turned around and was about to leave, but then he seemed to think of something. He looked at the alluring temptress and said, I have avenged Master Hao. You can rest assured. The 100-charm enchantress expression darkened, and she said softly, I've heard it from Senior Lu. Yu Qianqiu glanced at Lu Yanqing, then cupped his hands towards the few of them and said, goodbye. By the time when Lanfeng arrived at the Spirit Fong Valley with thousands of people, Yu Qianqiu had already appeared in the ghostly domain. Although he could directly teleport to Obedient Island, he still pretended to fly towards it. The reason he came here was to find out when his master would leave so that he could make the necessary preparations. Leaping over the surface of the lake, he could already see the Obedient Island in the distance. As he neared, he suddenly saw a purple shadow shooting towards him. Yu Qianqiu didn't even need to guess to know who it was, big liar. Zi chuckled and flashed to his side. She turned her head and asked, why are you back? Yu Qianqiu was not interested in the way she addressed him. His face darkened, and he rolled his dead fish eyes. With a voice that could not be any lighter, he said disdainfully, it's none of your business. The reason why he lowered his voice was because he was worried about Nongzhu, who loved her daughter as much as her life. Zi immediately stopped smiling, and her pretty face turned cold. But Yu Qianqiu had already landed on the Obedient Island, standing face to face with Hibiscus, who was looking forward to seeing him. Miss Mu bowed to him. Yu Qianqiu waved his hand, indicating that there was no need to be so polite. He smiled at Hibiscus and said, I will go and greet Master first. Let's talk later. Okay. Hibiscus obediently replied and watched him walk towards the big house. Zi pulled her arm and said coldly, Hibiscus, ignore him. Hibiscus nodded with a smile like a flower. As soon as Yu Qianqiu walked into the big house, he saw Bai Changchun, who was sitting cross-legged in the center with his eyes closed. Nongzhu was sitting on the right side of Bai Changchun. She stretched and yawned, boy, you are back. I was going to look for you on behalf of your master. Master, Senior Nongzhu. Yu Qianqiu bowed and sat on the left side of Bai Changchun, which was opposite to Nongzhu. They stared at each other, waiting for Bai Changchun to speak. No one knew what Bai Changchun was thinking. The house was quiet. After a long time, Bai Changchun opened his eyes. He looked at Yu Qianqiu and asked, what is it that you came back for? Yu Qianqiu was in awe, but he pretended to be generous and said, this time, I came back because I have something to ask Master. He always remembered what Bai Changchun said after he killed Healy. Bai Changchun's evaluation of Healy was too polite. He remembered it when he saw Bai Changchun. Therefore, although he seemed to be respectful, he did not dare to be too polite. Before Bai Changchun opened his mouth, Nongzhu asked, "What is it? Tell me about it." With a curious look on his face, he felt a little bored. Yu Qianqiu glanced at Bai Changchun. Seeing that the old man had no objection, he looked at Nongzhu and asked, "Senior Nongzhu, do you remember Yan Juexing?" "Him." Nongzhu smiled disapprovingly and said, "He is your sworn enemy. Both of you went from the cultivation world of Huaxia to the cornucopia. If you didn't make him famous, I wouldn't care who he is." Tilting his head to look at Bai Changchun, he explained, "He's the new disciple of Bing Qingzi. I've told you about him before. He's the one who was forced by your disciple to hide all day long. How pitiful." He then turned his head to ask Yu Qianqiu, "What's wrong? Are you fighting against each other again? Hasn't he been defeated by you all the time? Can't you defeat him? You even asked your master. You think too highly of him, don't you? What a joke. Who does he think he is? Why can't I defeat him?" Yu Qianqiu waved his hand and said disdainfully, "I happened to meet him before I came here. I seriously injured him and chopped off one of his arms. Unfortunately, he escaped." "You are so useless. You seriously injured him and chopped off one of his arms, but you let him escape." Nongzhu sat up straight and asked excitedly, "It can't be so simple. What's going on? Tell me." Yu Qianqiu frowned and said, "I only know what devil art that fellow cultivates, and it's incomparably strange. Actually, before I injured him this time, I'd already killed him once. But the shocking thing is that he was actually able to come back to life after being turned into a dried corpse, and in the end, he escaped. Master, have you ever heard of such an evil skill? Come back to life." Nongzhu was shocked and looked at Bai Changchun inquiringly. Bai Changchun was also a little surprised. He thought for a while and said slowly, "It's said that there is a skill that can bring people back to life after death. But I don't know what it is. But I don't believe that someone with a shallow cultivation who can defeat you can cultivate to the realm of resurrection. That realm is close to the divine sense. I'm afraid that even the masters in the immortal realm can't do that. It's really incredible." Nongzhu poked her head and asked weakly, "Old Bai, why don't you catch that guy and kill him again? So that you can confirm it again. I can also see what kind of resurrection skill it is." Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up and thought that it was a good idea. Bai Changchun glanced at them fiercely. They shrunk their heads and quickly extinguished their evil thoughts. They all knew that Bai Changchun was arrogant. As long as no one provoked him, he would not fight with such a junior. Unless Yan Juexing was a very powerful master who could make Bai Changchun have a strong desire to fight with him. But how could Bai Changchun take a fancy to a junior who could even defeat Yu Qianqiu? Nongzhu coughed awkwardly and changed the topic. She pointed at Yu Qianqiu and scolded, "Why are you looking at me like that? Maybe you were fooled by his camouflage." Yu Qianqiu was unhappy when he heard that. When he was about to refute, Nongzhu changed her words and said, "But it is also possible that the guy's devil kung fu is magical. He doesn't have to have a high cultivation. Yes. That guy's evil skill is really evil." Yu Qianqiu looked at Bai Changchun and nodded in agreement. Bai Changchun shook his head and said, "Evil skill. What could truly be called demonic arts were the cultivation methods of the demonic cultivators in the ancient times, which were even more ancient than the ancient times. But the devil realm has been sealed for countless years. Until now, I've never heard of anyone practicing evil skill. How could there be evil skill without any sign? The devil realm." Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu were stunned at the same time. Both of them were confused. Nongzhu asked suspiciously, isn't there only the immortal realm, the underworld and the human realm? How come there is a devil realm and it's sealed? I've heard of even older legends. Why haven't I heard of the devil realm? I haven't heard of it before either. But when I took over the demon realm, the former torture envoy mentioned it. Bai Changchun sighed and said, it's a horrible existence. It once dominated the three realms and even the immortal realm and the underworld had to bow their heads to it. Later, the devil realm was sealed. The immortal realm and the underworld joined hands to eradicate the evil cultivators in the human realm. They would rather kill the wrong people than let them go. So no one dared to mention the word devil realm, for fear of being implicated. Over time, the legend about the devil realm disappeared in the human realm. The evil cultivators in the devil realm are so powerful. Nongzhu swallowed and said, why haven't I heard you mention it before? Bai Changchun glanced at Yu Qianqiu, who was in a daze. Nongzhu looked at him and immediately understood. It seemed that she had benefited from this guy. Bai Changchun mainly said it to him. Bai Changchun looked out of the door and said leisurely, in ancient times, evil cultivators wreaked havoc and formed their own way, which was called the devil realm. There was a top master of the devil realm who forcibly opened up a fourth realm apart from the immortal realm, the underworld and the human realm, which was called the devil realm. The cultivation of this top master of the devil realm was so powerful that it made the top masters of the immortal realm and the underworld tremble. In the end, he broke through the known peak of cultivation in the four realms and ascended to the legendary and illusory divine realm. This person was recognized as the first master of the devil realm since the beginning of the devil realm. He was called the devil god by the later generations of the devil realm. Chapter 700. The Devil God. Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu both murmured with fascination. A magnificent scene appeared in their minds, in which a peerless genius stood between heaven and earth. They couldn't see his face clearly, but the wind was blowing, the heroes were chasing after the deer, and the demons were dancing wildly, but he was the only one. Just think about it, during that era where experts were numerous like trees in a forest, how could a peerless genius who was able to look down upon all experts, shake the three dimensions with his might, and forcefully open up a world of his own? How could others not be fascinated by him? Bai Changchun continued slowly, it was also because he went to the divine realm that the devil realm lost its pillar. Many years later, the devil realm gradually declined, and finally the immortal realm and the underworld had the opportunity to raise their heads, which led to the fate of the devil realm being sealed. He sighed again and said, it's a pity that we were not born at the right time, and couldn't see the peerless glory of the devil god. If we could fight with him, we would die without regret. These words caused Nongzhu and Yu Qianqiu to look at each other and roll their eyes. They muttered in their hearts, old fellow, you're biting off more than you can chew. Although you're formidable, you're still far behind the devil god. The devil god is a master of the divine realm. With your cultivation, are you qualified to fight with him? The room was quiet, and Bai Changchun still looked leisurely and fascinated. Yu Qianqiu secretly glanced at him, and quietly counted his fingers repeatedly. As a disciple, it was not appropriate for him to criticize his master for reaching beyond his grasp. Nongzhu suddenly coughed and smiled awkwardly, old Bai, the times are different, and each has its own talent. Speaking of which, as the first master in the world, your status in the cultivation world is no different from that of the devil god. Many people admire you, so why do you admire the ancients? Haha. It's a little unrealistic, let's think about the present and the future. Bai Changchun shook his head slightly and said firmly, after learning the legend of the devil god from the former torture envoy, I often look up to the vast sky and have a goal to strive for in my life. I look forward to one day learning from the devil god, so that my cultivation will not be in vain. Maybe you think I'm a little ambitious, but I think it's not impossible, because the great way is endless. The scope of the old man's goal was too great. Yu Qianqiu's eyes were focused on his nose was focused on his heart, his eyes were focused, he counted on his fingers without saying a word. Nongzhu couldn't help but murmur, "You won't be able to see the devil god. Wait until you see the demonic monarch, the immortal emperor, and the emperor of hell." Ah! I remember now. Yu Qianqiu suddenly raised his head and said, Yan Zhuixing is related to the 10,000 demons, the number one sect in China's cultivation world. His father, Yan Bugui, is from the 10,000 demons, and his grandfather was the previous sect leader of the 10,000 demons. Master, do you think that the 10,000 demons are related to the ancient devil Dao? These are two completely unrelated matters. Bai Changchun said indifferently, the current devil Dao and the ancient devil Dao are not the same thing. The real devil Dao is quite complicated. Human, ghost, and demon can all be classified as devil Dao. The reason why there were devil cultivators in ancient times is that after the world was created, those pioneers of cultivation had no standard cultivation methods. In order to survive in the savage and dangerous era, they had no choice but to create all kinds of cultivation techniques. Because they were pioneers of cultivation, no one gave them advice on how to avoid risks. Therefore, many people, demons, and ghosts went astray and became possessed by the devil. These people, demons, and ghosts who went astray and became possessed by the devil were collectively called devil cultivators. They were the pioneers of the devil Dao. Among them, there were many peerless talents, and the devil god was the best. How could the current devil Dao and the 10,000 demons compare to them? So that's how it is. Yu Qianqiu suddenly realized. Nongzhu clicked her tongue and said, I didn't expect that a group of people who went astray could suppress the people of the immortal world and the underworld. That's really amazing. Bai Changchun stared at him and snorted, even if they went astray and became possessed by the devil, do you think those who can create their own cultivation methods are ordinary people? Which one of them is not a peerless talent with a mind and talent beyond ordinary people? Because of the danger in the wild, except for those big tribes, many people live in a precarious state at any time. The cultivation methods created by these people are all aimed at quick success, bloodshed, brutality, killing, and great power. In order to save their lives, there is nothing they don't dare to do. After all, the devil Dao is also forced out. Nongzhu nodded slowly and sighed, yes. It was only in that kind of precarious living environment that so many amazing talents could be produced. If it were now, who would dare to risk their lives to practice at random? There is no ready-made cultivation method to practice properly. Now I finally understand why countless amazing legends that can't be replicated always appear in that ancient and dangerous wild era. I couldn't figure it out before, but it turns out that they are all forced out. Respectable. What a group of people. No wonder they can suppress the immortal world and the underworld. Yu Qianqiu also nodded silently. If a person wasn't forced into a dead end, how many of them would risk their lives and take a risk out of desperation? This is similar to the saying in his previous life that heroes are born in troubled times. In a peaceful environment, there are not so many heroes. Bai Changchun looked at Yu Qianqiu, who was silent, and asked, You came to me to ask about this? Yu Qianqiu suddenly came back to his senses. Seeing that his master and Nongzhu were staring at him, he scratched his head and said with an embarrassed smile, I heard that the Eastern Holy Land is about to open, so I came back to ask Master if you really want to go there. Yes. Bai Changchun nodded indifferently and said, I have contacted ancestor Nanming of Xian Island. In a few days, I will go to Xian Island to settle down temporarily and wait for the East Holy Land to open. Nongzhu's expression also became solemn. She stared at Yu Qianqiu and interrupted, Your master was about to ask me to call you back to talk about this. I didn't expect you to come back in advance. It saves me the trouble of looking for you everywhere. Yu Qianqiu asked weakly, Master, can't I not go? He knew clearly that once Bai Changchun left, his life would not be so good. Nongzhu nodded in agreement and said, yes. Old Bai, think about it again. In any case, your current physical body has already extended your lifespan by another 200 years. With these 200 years, with your aptitude, it's not impossible for you to break through again. Why do you want to go to that place of no return? Isn't it pretty good here? As she said, she raised her hand and pointed at Yu Qianqiu and said, once you leave, this guy will be in big trouble. He has offended so many people. There are a lot of people who want to kill him. Yu Qianqiu nodded honestly and said, yes. Yes. Nongzhu, you worry too much. Bai Changchun said calmly, even if you and I are killed, it is not certain that anyone can kill him. Ah. Yu Qianqiu was stunned and then said with a bitter smile, Master, aren't you mocking me? Nongzhu looked up and down at Yu Qianqiu as if she was looking at a monster. She knew that Bai Changchun would not lie. There must be a reason for him to say such a thing. Bai Changchun said indifferently, I heard from Nongzhu that when you were expelled from Onquancung, you had a close relationship with a white fox who had been cultivating for 1,000 years. You also wrote several songs for her. Is that true? Nongzhu was a little confused. When she knew that Yu Qianqiu, the scum of the cultivation world, was accepted as a disciple by Bai Changchun, she told Bai Changchun about the story of this scum of the cultivation world. It had been a long time. She didn't know why Bai Changchun brought it up again. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He also didn't know why Bai Changchun asked this question. He thought it was not a secret, so he nodded and admitted it. That's right, Bai Changchun stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, I'll tell you one thing, and you'll understand. Many years ago, I comprehended a set of incantations somewhere in the cultivation world of Huaxia. I accidentally hit a treasure from a deep mountain. After I carefully examined it, I understood what it was. For this thing to fall into my hands, it might be the will of the heavens that it belongs to me. When I was hesitating whether to rely on myself or the treasure, a white fox who had been cultivating for 1,000 years suddenly rushed in. Maybe it was attracted by the movement of my cultivation. Looking back on my life of cultivation, I always relied on myself. There was no need to rely on treasures. At that time, I made up my mind to abandon the treasure and watched it be taken away by the white fox. When I accepted you as a disciple, I was just curious about your abnormality. I wanted to explore it slowly. Later, combined with the relationship between you and the white fox that Nongzhu told me, I immediately guessed that the thing in the white fox's hands was in your hands. If this isn't God's will, then what is? I didn't expect that the thing that I didn't want would come to me in a roundabout way. Moreover, it appeared at the right time. Yu Qianqiu, do you understand what I'm talking about now? Nongzhu was confused. She interrupted first and said, what are you talking about? Bai Changchun's words were very obvious. How could Yu Qianqiu not know what he was talking about? He was naturally referring to the golden bead. He was a little dumbfounded. It seemed that the old man already knew that he had the golden bead. From what he said, he seemed to know the use of the golden bead. Master! I really didn't mean to hide it. Yu Qianqiu immediately got up and knelt down. He was a little panicked. This old man couldn't tolerate sand in his eyes. He was even prepared to run away. Bai Changchun waved his hand and said, this thing is extraordinary. It's right not to say it. Don't mention it to anyone in the future. You will need it for many things in the future. I can also go to the Eastern Holy Land with peace of mind because of it. If the heavens have feelings, the heavens will also grow old. This is God's will. Hearing this, Yu Qianqiu's beating heart finally calmed down. He then asked suspiciously, Master, what is this thing called? What are its uses? Bai Changchun was stunned. He stared deeply at Yu Qianqiu for a while and said slowly, since you don't know, then don't ask anymore. When the time comes, you will naturally know. This is God's will. You don't need to ask anyone. Do you understand? Chapter 701. It would be strange if he could understand it. Yu Qianqiu answered submissively. In fact, he hated it when people talked about God's will. If so, he deserved to be killed by lightning in his previous life. He was depressed at the thought of it. However, it was strange that the golden bead that Bai Suzhen gave him belonged to Bai Changchun. After it fell into his hands, he became Bai Changchun's disciple. It was really a big circle. Nongzhu felt that she had missed something wonderful. She asked anxiously, "What treasure are you talking about? Tell me about it." Bai Changchun glanced at her and said, "Don't ask about things that you shouldn't know." Nongzhu's face fell immediately. She said in a muffled voice, "Old Bai, you are not a good friend. Why are you still hiding it from me when you've already said so much?" Bai Changchun ignored her and said quietly, "After I leave, the demon realm needs the next torture envoy." Hearing this, the room suddenly became quiet. Yu Qianqiu began to count his fingers again. To be honest, he was not interested in the torture envoy of the demon realm at all. It seemed that the responsibility was more important than the benefits. Nongzhu was no longer angry. She turned her head casually and looked out of the door. She murmured, "The weather outside seems good, Yu Qianqiu. From today on, I will hand over the demon realm to you." Bai Changchun said bluntly, without any beating around the bush. Nongzhu was stunned for a moment, and then let out a sigh of relief. She cupped one hand and the other before her chest to Yu Qianqiu, whose face was full of astonishment, and jokingly said, "Yu Qianqiu, congratulations. Congratulations on finally becoming the world-famous torture master of the demon region." Yu Qianqiu came to himself and waved his hands repeatedly. "Master, I can't do it. I really can't do it. You'd better give it to someone else." Bai Changchun said with a blank face, "Oh, who do you think is suitable?" "Him." Yu Qianqiu pointed at Nongzhu without hesitation. There were only 3 people here. If he did not drag Nongzhu down with him, who else would he drag? Yu Qianqiu said eloquently, "Senior Nongzhu's cultivation is higher than mine, and she has many friends in the cultivation world. If there is any trouble, she can find many people to help her. I can't do that. I have a lot of enemies to begin with, and I have a lot of problems to deal with. I don't have the time to manage the devil domain. The burden is too heavy for me to bear." "Bullshit." Nongzhu immediately jumped up, pointed at Yu Qianqiu's nose and scolded, "Don't involve me in the matter between you two, or don't blame me for being rude." Yu Qianqiu gritted his teeth. If it wasn't for Bai Changchun, he would have scolded him back. Bai Changchun gently waved his hand and said, "Nongzhu, you go out first. I need to talk to him alone." Nongzhu rolled her eyes and sat down. She said with a smile, "Old Bai, you really have a lot of secrets. What secrets do you have? Let me listen to them. I promise I won't disturb you too. I'll only bring my ears and not my mouth. You change your face faster than turning the page of a book. What a fickle villain." Yu Qianqiu pointed at the mulberry tree and scolded the locust tree. Nongzhu's expression didn't change. She kept her mouth shut and let him scold her with a smile. She had entered the state of only bringing her ears and not her mouth. Who would have thought that Bai Changchun would only say a few words, and he would immediately flee in defeat? Bai Changchun said, "Some secrets can only be told to the next torture envoy of the devil domain. If you really want to hear it, I'll take it that you agree to be the next torture envoy." Watching Nongzhu leave, Yu Qianqiu suddenly became listless. Bai Changchun waved his hand, and the soundproof bounded domain was instantly formed. Nongzhu wandered outside the room for a while. She knew that it was impossible for her to eavesdrop under Bai Changchun's nose with her cultivation. She waved her hand and walked out. But when she saw Ze chatting with Hibiscus by the 1,000-mile lake, she suddenly became worried. Although she didn't want to be the torture envoy of the devil domain, for Ziyi's sake, she didn't want Yu Qianqiu to be the torture envoy. If the news that Yu Qianqiu was in charge of the devil domain was spread out, the devil domain would definitely become the target of public criticism. Because Yu Qianqiu's cultivation was too weak to deter those with ulterior motives. The vast devil domain would probably become a hot spot for all forces to compete for. Yu Qianqiu's fate was worrying. Without Bai Changchun's deterrence, those experts at the late stage of Huashan realm would be like wild horses running wild in the cultivation world. Few people in the world could restrain them. Nongzhu admitted that she couldn't stop them with her cultivation. The only way was to ask Wen Lanfeng to take charge, but this was not a long-term solution. What was Bai Changchun thinking? He actually dared to give such a heavy responsibility of the devil domain to Yu Qianqiu. Wasn't he afraid that Yu Qianqiu would mess it up and even lose his life? This was simply harming him. Nongzhu shook her head in confusion, but then she remembered what Bai Changchun said before. Did Yu Qianqiu really have a life-saving magic weapon? Logically speaking, Bai Changchun was not a person who made rash decisions. There must be a reason for him to do so. Thinking of this, Nongzhu was more or less confident. Even so, he kept walking around the island, anxiously waiting for the result of the conversation between the master and the disciple in the center of the island. He hoped that the conversation between the master and the disciple would break down and Bai Changchun would not leave. That would be the best result. It should be known that once Bai Changchun left, the world would be in chaos. The sun went from high in the sky to the west, and then from the west to the night. Until the night was full of stars and the bright moon was in the sky, there was no movement in the room. Nongzhu didn't know what the master and the disciple were talking about for such a long time. Furong and Ziyi were also a little impatient. They asked Nongzhu several times, but Nongzhu just answered perfunctorily. So the two girls returned to the lake, back to back, and stayed up for the night. When the sun shone from the east again, the conversation between the master and the disciple in the room came to an end. Yu Qianqiu didn't know when he moved to the opposite side of Bai Changchun. The master and the disciple talked face to face for nearly a whole day. Yu Qianqiu sat quietly in the same place, digesting the secrets that belonged to the former torturers. Bai Changchun said a lot during the day's conversation, and Yu Qianqiu also asked a lot of questions. Bai Changchun answered all his questions. The more he knew, the more serious Yu Qianqiu looked. He didn't expect that the devil domain had so many secrets. That's right, master. Yu Qianqiu suddenly raised his head and said, "There's something I forgot to ask, master. I once followed the flame eye of Twilight Valley's blue fire underground and saw a few inconceivable things." Bai Changchun froze. There's something under the flame eye of the blue fire. What did you see? Even master doesn't know. Yu Qianqiu found this rather strange, and then he gestured with his hand. Below that is a massive underground space flowing with lava. It's an extremely spectacular sight. Several massive blue lotuses grew on the river of lava, and Twilight Valley's blue fire came from these lotuses. Most inconceivable of all was that there was a naked child sleeping on one of the lotuses, not the slightest bit afraid of the blue fire. Bai Changchun stroked his beard and said, "You mean to say that the child was sleeping naked in the blue fire?" "Yes. There's something even more inconceivable than that." Yu Qianqiu clicked his tongue. "At the time, I struck the child awake, but who knew that the child would jump straight into the roiling lava as if he were swimming in a river? Because I struck him, the child dived into the lava and found a helper. The helper he found was too frightening. It was a savage, majestic, and dignified dragon. Damn, this is the first time in my life that I've seen a living dragon." "A dragon?" Bai Changchun suddenly stood up and gravely asked, "Are you sure you didn't see wrong? It really was a dragon." Yu Qianqiu also stood up and gestured at the dragon's appearance. It should have been a dragon, and a red one at that. Its entire body was covered in bright red scales, and I could sense a majestic and ancient aura the moment it appeared. But strangely, I seemed to see that the dragon's claws were locked down by dazzling golden chains, and the chains seemed to be connected to the bottom of the lava. I don't know if I saw wrong, but who would have the ability to lock down a dragon? I was scared out of my wits and didn't dare to look further, so I used the miraculous effect of the golden bead to escape. After gesturing, Yu Qianqiu asked again, "Master, didn't you say that the dragon mount of the Myriad Swords Demon Lord was red? Could that dragon be the one that belonged to the Myriad Swords Demon Lord?" Bai Changchun pondered for a while, and slowly nodded. "It should be. I didn't expect the legend to be true." He then turned to Yu Qianqiu and explained, "The previous torture envoy mentioned it once. If you hadn't mentioned it, I would have forgotten about it. Regarding that dragon, there are two theories. The premise is that the Myriad Swords Demon Lord was severely injured. The first theory is that the Myriad Swords Demon Lord knew that he couldn't hold on any longer, so he gave the dragon its freedom, and the dragon soared into the sky. This matter was too mysterious." Yu Qianqiu couldn't help but ask, could the second theory be that the dragon was locked underground? The second theory doesn't make sense. Otherwise, the first torture envoy who knew what happened would know where the dragon was, unless he deliberately kept it a secret. Now it seems that he must have witnessed what happened with his own eyes, but he deliberately hid it and passed it down as a legend. Bai Changchun explained, "This theory is also because the Myriad Swords Demon Lord knew that he couldn't hold on any longer, so he was afraid that the dragon would avenge him on impulse. He knew that the dragon was no match for him, so he locked it deep underground. At the same time, he told the dragon that retribution is inevitable. When someone has the ability to break the shackles he placed on the dragon and release it, that person will be the fated person who has the ability to avenge the Myriad Swords Demon Lord. The dragon will then come out and help the fated person to avenge the Myriad Swords Demon Lord. That doesn't make sense." Yu Qianqiu rubbed his chin and raised his eyebrows. How could others know about the conversation between the Myriad Swords Demon Lord and the dragon? Those who knew about it were either there at the time, or the Myriad Swords Demon Lord passed on the message. The former is more likely. Otherwise, the Myriad Swords Demon Lord would have no reason to tell others about the agreement between him and the dragon. There's no need to speculate anymore. Bai Changchun sighed. "Since you've already seen the dragon underground, it means that the second theory is true. I didn't expect that. The dragon has always been underground in the demon domain, keeping its promise with the Myriad Swords Demon Lord and waiting for the fated person. I really don't know how it survived such a long time." Chapter 702. On the side, Yu Qianqiu sighed endlessly. Divine dragons were locked underground not for hundreds or thousands of years, but for tens of thousands of years at every turn. Who could say for sure how many years had passed since the ancient times, but it was probably more than 100,000 years. It was terrifying to think about being locked up for so many years. Just as he was shaking his head with his master, Yu Qianqiu's eyes suddenly lit up, and he said excitedly, "Master, why don't we think of a way to release the divine dragon? Think about it. We're both abiding by the agreement with the Demon Lord of 10,000 Swords, so we should be on the same side. A divine dragon, a god-tier expert. With a divine dragon guarding the devil domain, who in the world would dare to do anything to the devil domain, hee." The more he spoke, the more excited he became. Even he admired his own cleverness for coming up with such a good idea. He couldn't help but laugh sinisterly. Bai Changchun looked at him speechlessly. It was hard to associate his disciple's expression with that of a good person. He then said coldly, "It's true that the divine dragon's cultivation is high, but don't misunderstand. The divine dragon is also a member of the divine beasts. Just because it has the word divine doesn't mean it's a god-tier expert. Yu Qianqiu's sinister laughter stopped abruptly, and his expression twitched. Master, you mean that the divine dragon isn't necessarily very powerful? Bai Changqiu nodded. It's not that it's not powerful, but the so-called divine beasts are beasts with supernatural powers. They have innate advantages that other beasts can't compare to. After cultivation, they all have the possibility of reaching the god tier. As for other beasts, it's not so easy to reach the god tier. The divine dragon's cultivation definitely hasn't reached the god tier. You should know that the demon lord of 10,000 swords didn't even reach the god tier when he died. Think about it, how could he control a god tier dragon? If the divine dragon really reached the god tier, the demon lord of 10,000 swords wouldn't have died with the divine dragon protecting him. Even with the myriad swords demon monarch's cultivation, he wouldn't be able to trap the divine dragon underground for so many years. I'm afraid that the divine dragon has already broken free from its shackles and escaped. Even if its cultivation hasn't reached the god level, it's probably many times stronger than the experts in the cultivation world, right? Yu Qianqiu said weakly. Judging from his tone, he seemed to be unwilling to give up. It seemed like he really wanted to get a divine dragon to protect him. Bai Changqiu nodded slightly and said, the masters of the cultivation world definitely can't be compared to the divine dragon. Although the divine dragon is not a match for the immortal emperor and the emperor of the underworld, it is still qualified to fight against them. Think about it. How can the masters of the cultivation world be compared to it? At least my current cultivation is definitely not comparable to the divine dragon. Then isn't it just right to let it out to guard the demon region? Yu Qianqiu finally couldn't help but voice his desire. At this time, his mind was not thinking about letting the dragon god protect the devil's domain. Instead, he was thinking about building a relationship with the dragon god. When the time came, he would have the final say in the cultivation world. He could do whatever he wanted and he would not have to work so hard anymore. I advise you to give up on this idea. Bai Changqiu stared at him coldly and said in a deep voice, the world is full of changes. The dragon god has been detained for so many years. No one knows what it is thinking now. Can you guarantee that it will be a good thing if it is released? Once its bestial nature is unleashed, it will definitely bring disaster to the whole world. When that time comes, who can control it? Can you control it? This must be one of the reasons why the demon lord of swords detained it. Moreover, the shackles that the demon lord of swords set on the dragon god cannot be broken with the dragon god's cultivation. Do you think that the two of us can break it with our cultivation? Ah. Hee hee. I was just saying it casually. If it doesn't work, then forget it. Hee hee. Yu Qianqiu smiled awkwardly. He was also shocked when he thought of the scene of the red guy roaring to the world and going berserk. He was just thinking of using the gold technique that he cultivated to try and break the shackles of the dragon god. Now it seemed that it was better to let the dragon continue to stay underground. He did not want to go for wool and come home shorn. When the time came, he would not be able to help but become a scourge instead. I have told you everything that needs to be said. If there is nothing else. Bai Changqiu looked out the door slowly and sighed leisurely. Then. My mission is completed. It is time to go. He had always been calm, but now his words were filled with complicated emotions. Yu Qianqiu closed his lips tightly and looked at his master who was sighing. He was a little speechless. No matter how cold-hearted his master was, leaving this place where he had stayed for thousands of years would be a little emotional. According to his master, he was the one who had been in charge of the demon region for the longest time among all the torturers. Moreover, his master was not a cold-hearted person. He was just a warm person on the inside and cold on the outside. Yu Qianqiu slowly lowered his head and said with a trembling voice, Master, why don't you not leave? I'm afraid I can't handle it alone. In fact, I wanted to leave 300 years ago. Unfortunately, I haven't found a suitable person to take charge of the demon region. That's why it has been delayed until now. Bai Changchun showed a rare smile and said with a faint smile, now it is time to leave. I believe you can do it well. Even if you can't do it well, there must be a reason for this. Yu Qianqiu looked up and said, Master, don't you think Senior Wen Lanfeng is more suitable to take charge of the demon region? He is not a bad person. No one in the cultivation world is his match except for you. I want someone who can shoulder a heavy burden, not a good person. If a good person can solve the problem, there are many better people in the world. Why do I need to find him? Bai Changchun snorted and said, even if you didn't appear, Wen Lanfeng would at most be my second choice. I spared his life twice just in case. If there is no other way, I will let him take charge of the demon region. Yu Qianqiu was stunned and could not help asking, why? Bai Changchun showed an air of arrogance and said, Wen Lanfeng, this person's cultivation talent is indeed good compared to others. In terms of cultivation, he is indeed suitable to take charge of the demon region. But this person is decisive. A woman can make him dizzy. He has a gentle personality and lacks ruthlessness in handling things. As a person who controls the overall situation, these are his fatal weaknesses. If he takes charge of the demon region, he will be used by people with ulterior motives sooner or later. If I really entrust the demon region to him, I am afraid I will first have to massacre all the soul formation masters in the world before I can be more or less relieved. But even so, it is not a long-term solution. A fatal weakness is a fatal weakness, and it is difficult to change. If I kill this group of people who can use him, there will be another group of people who can use him. I can't kill everyone in the world for the demon region, right? As he said this, he looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, but you are different. I have been silently observing you for a long time. On the surface, you do things by hook or by crook to achieve your goals. You are even cruel and merciless, but you always have a kind heart. This prevents you from being unable to control your ambition and becoming an ambitious person. A person who controls the overall situation can't be soft-hearted. You should be decisive when things happen. Thunder and blood are all means, not results, so you must know right from wrong, good from evil, and right from wrong. In this regard, you are more suitable to take charge of the demon region than Nongzhu. As for other reasons, I will not say. Damn it! Is this a compliment or a scolding? Yu Qianqiu touched his nose awkwardly and quickly changed the topic. Then who is the first candidate? Is it Senior Nongzhu? Yes, not only did the former punishment commissioner take a fancy to him, but so did I. Bai Changchun snorted and said, I wanted Nongzhu to take over, but this guy has been running away. For this reason, he even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to the late stage of soul formation. He really wants to live a carefree life. Don't look down on Nongzhu. Nongzhu's talent for cultivation is not worse than Wen Lanfeng's, and it is even better. He only suppressed his cultivation and did not break through to prevent me from finding a reason to let him take over as the punishment commissioner. Does he think that I can't see through him? I guess after I leave, even if it is to protect himself, he will not take long to break through to the late stage of soul formation. That's good. You can have a helper. Damn it. You win. Yu Qianqiu hated Nongzhu very much. In order to escape responsibility, he even suppressed his cultivation and did not break through. Damn it. You set me up. No, I can't let him take advantage of me. Master. After careful consideration, I think Senior Nongzhu is more suitable to take charge of the demon region. Then he patted his chest and promised, Master, don't worry. Leave it to me. I have a way to make him accept the position of punishment commissioner. I will go to him now. No need. Bai Changchun stopped him coldly and looked outside the door. He said expressionlessly, he is destined to have a relationship with the demon region in this life. No matter how far he runs, he has to come back. Then he stared at Yu Qianqiu and said, isn't it good to have a master at the late stage of soul formation to run errands for you? Yu Qianqiu felt wronged and said, that guy is very cunning. He often goes against me now. Once he breaks through to the late stage of soul formation, how can I order him around? You don't have to worry about that. Even if he pretends to be stupid, there will be someone who can order him around. Bai Changchun snorted and said, does he think that he can live freely for the rest of his life without being in charge of the demon region? What a joke. What you owe me, you better pay me back. Yu Qianqiu looked at Bai Changchun suspiciously. It was the first time that he heard Bai Changchun say something like this. He seemed to smell a trace of conspiracy. He had a premonition that Nongzhu's life in the future would not be so easy. The old guy had obviously dug a trap for Nongzhu. A trap dug by the world's top master. Damn it. She would definitely be killed. Yu Qianqiu was overjoyed when he thought that Nongzhu would be in trouble. But when he thought that he would have to shoulder more responsibilities, he couldn't be happy anymore. What a bitter life. Seeing his bitter face, Bai Changchun put down his hands behind his back and stretched out one hand. He opened his palm and showed a bunch of silver balls. He said calmly, if these things really have the effect you said, you can come to me if you really have any trouble that you can't solve. Of course, the premise is that I am still alive. Chapter 703. Ha! Master is the #1 expert in the world. No matter how mysterious the East Holy Land is, it's still in this world. Who can hurt Master? If there's any trouble, I'll definitely come to you. Yu Qianqiu answered bluntly, his face smiling like a chrysanthemum. Since Bai Changchun already knew about the golden bead, Yu Qianqiu also tactfully told Bai Changchun about the space of the golden bead and gave him a lot of silver beads. His original idea was to take advantage of Bai Changchun's convenience to go to the East Holy Land and find a chance to gain experience there. How could he forget that he could still invite this great master back if there was any trouble? My trump card is still there, I'm not afraid. The happy Yu Qianqiu was already imagining. If some people really went too far, when he invited Bai Changchun back, my god. That scene will definitely be very exciting, sweetheart. This guy was actually secretly looking forward to someone coming to the demon region to find trouble. But he was more or less worried that something would happen to Bai Changchun in the East Holy Land. The evil smile on his face betrayed his thoughts. Seeing him like this, Bai Changchun's face turned cold and he said in a low voice, don't come to me if you can solve the problem yourself. Go out and call Ziyi here. I have something to talk to her alone. Seeing that the old guy was angry, Yu Qianqiu's heart trembled and his smile froze. He nodded and bowed and hurriedly ran out. Once out of the big house, his steps became leisurely again, and he walked calmly to the side of the 1,000 Miles Lake. The few people by the lake all noticed him and flashed over. Looking at his proud face, they didn't know what treasure he had picked up. Nongzhu touched her chin and was puzzled. Previously, in order to refuse the position of torture envoy, this guy fought with her so fiercely. Why did he look so relaxed now? Could it be that this cunning guy got rid of the position? Her man finally came out. Furong's eyes were smiling, more beautiful than the crescent moon at night. Ziyi asked with an envious face, Yu Qianqiu, Senior, I talked to you alone for such a long time. Did he teach you something good again? She knew that Bai Changchun had always treated people coldly and was a man of few words. It was simply unheard of for him to talk through the night like this. Yu Qianqiu acted like a vile person who had the upper hand. He pointed at Ziyi's beautiful nose and said, "My master has something to say to you in private. Hurry up, don't make my master unhappy." Ah! Ziyi's mouth was wide open. She had never spoken to Elder Bai alone before, and now he actually summoned her. Ziyi was excited and nervous at the same time. She was at a loss of what to do. She stammered, "Really? Oh. I'll go now." Nongju rolled her eyes and looked at Ziyi hurriedly rushing to the big house and respectfully entering the door. Why was Ziyi's words more effective than her own master's? Yu Qianqiu strolled to the lakeside and began to do some broadcasted gymnastics exercises. He looked at the vast demon domain in the distance and was in a good mood. "From today onwards, this is my territory." Nongju and Furong looked at each other. Then Nongju flashed over and pretended to accompany him to do chest stretching exercises. She asked casually, "That Yu Qianqiu? Why did your master call Ziyi in?" Without turning his head, Yu Qianqiu said, "How would I know? You can ask Ziyi later." Being rejected, Nongju was not angry. She said, "What did you say to old Bai? Why did you take so long to speak? What did they say? Tell me, and I'll see if I can give you some advice." Yu Qianqiu withdrew his arm and turned around to look at her. He asked, "Do you really want to know?" Nongju looked back at the direction of the big house guiltily and said in a low voice, "Don't worry. I just want to listen and give you some advice. I won't tell anyone. If you don't believe me, I can swear." Yu Qianqiu snorted and stared at him and said with a cold smile, "You're also too despicable. My master said that he had found out long ago that you suppressed your cultivation and didn't break through in order to avoid being a torture master. You are so boring. If you don't want to be a torture master, just give up. Why do you have to play tricks with your old friend? Touch your own conscience and tell me, how can you feel at ease?" The wind was blowing by the lake, and Nongju's heart was a little cold. Bai Changchun had found out long ago, but he didn't mention it. What was he up to? Thinking of Bai Changchun's means, every time he talked to her, he looked at her with a sneer in his heart. Nongju immediately shivered. Based on his character, he was really tolerant of her for so many years and didn't punish her. Nongju felt lucky and thanked Bai Changchun for his generosity, but she felt that something was wrong. She looked at the direction of the big house guiltily again and asked in a low voice, "Yu Qianqiu, don't fool me. You can't talk about me for so long, can you? What else? You know, there are some words that can't be said to you." Yu Qianqiu left after saying that and went to flirt with Furong. Nongju pulled a long face. Not long after, Ziyi came out. She had a serious expression on her face. She walked over and looked at Yu Qianqiu firmly, as if saying, "I will support you." Yu Qianqiu was confused and didn't know what Bai Changchun had said to her. Nongju immediately went over with a smile and asked, "My dear apprentice, what did Senior Bai say to you? Come on, tell me, so that I can give you some advice." Ziyi's firm eyes softened and she pouted her mouth in grievance, "Master, I promised Senior Bai that I wouldn't tell anyone. Don't force me, okay?" Nongju's face was completely dark. The muscles on her face twitched for a while, but she still squeezed out a smile and said, "Ha. Don't be angry, Ziyi. I won't force you." In fact, behind the smile, two tightly clenched fists were making a muffled sound. Yu Qianqiu, that brat, did not say anything, but even his own disciple did not pay attention to him. However, he dared to wrong anyone, but he could not bear to wrong Ziyi. Thus, he could only let himself be wronged and sulk. Seeing this scene, Yu Qianqiu turned around and smiled, like a fox that had stolen a chicken. He was happy to see Nongju being defeated. "Nongju. By Changchun's voice, Yu Qianqiu suddenly turned around and saw that Bai Changchun had appeared here at some point in time. The expressions of the juniors became respectful. Nongzhu said with a gloomy face, "What's the matter?" Bai Changchun stared at him with a faint smile and said slowly, "We have known each other for many years. From today on, I'm afraid we have to separate." There was a touch of nostalgia in his tone. It was not easy to hear such a tone from Bai Changchun's mouth. Nongzhu was stunned, and his face returned to normal in an instant. All his anger disappeared. Of course, he knew what Bai Changchun's words meant. He was really going to leave for the place that he had never returned from since ancient times. The world's most powerful master for more than 1,000 years, the old friend that he had known for many years, was bidding farewell to him. The past was still vivid in his mind. Thinking back to the time when he traveled through space and time, the originally blurry memories and the things that he usually couldn't even remember suddenly appeared in front of his eyes as if it was only yesterday. He remembered that he had tricked him to come to the demon ghost region, but he had restrained the world's most powerful master for 1,000 years. He had shouldered the burden that belonged to him. He had let him down. He owed it to him. "Senior Bai." Zi whimpered. Her eyes were red, and big drops of tears fell down. Her shoulders trembled, and she covered her mouth as she sobbed. She looked at the world's most powerful master with tears in her eyes. She thought about the place he was going to and that she would never see him again. She couldn't control her emotions. Although she had heard that Senior Bai would go to the East Holy Land one day, she didn't expect it to be so soon. Senior Bai had just told her personally. Furong was shocked. She didn't know what was going to happen, but she suddenly realized that the atmosphere was not right. Zi was crying, and there was a sense of separation between them. Nongzhu's lips were tightly shut, and she turned to look at the crying Zi. Obviously, she already knew. He put his hand on Ziyi's shoulder, stared at Bai Changchun, and said with a smile, "Old Bai, you." His voice was a little hoarse, and his throat was a little dry. He couldn't finish his words, and his face tightened. Yu Qianqiu, who knew what was going on, didn't feel anything, but the atmosphere made him feel uncomfortable. He stood at the side and scratched his head. Suddenly, he saw Furong's bewildered expression. He immediately pushed Furong lightly and said, "Master has always favored you. Quickly kowtow to Master." Furong's expression became more and more confused. She didn't know why she had to kowtow for no reason. However, she always listened to Yu Qianqiu's words unconditionally. She immediately knelt down and kowtowed to Bai Changchun. After 3 kowtows, Bai Changchun waved his hand, and Furong couldn't continue kowtowing anymore. She was lifted up by a gentle airflow without any resistance. Hibiscus looked at Yu Qianqiu as if she wanted to say something. Yu Qianqiu smiled at her, indicating that it was fine. Nongzhu, Shuntian Island might not be peaceful during this period of time. Bring Furong and Zi to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest for the time being. As for the rest, Yu Qianqiu will naturally arrange it. Bai Changchun said with a faint smile. Furong looked at Yu Qianqiu again, and revealed a puzzled expression, as if asking, "Why do you want me to leave?" Yu Qianqiu gave her a look, indicating that she should listen to him. Furong immediately didn't have any objections. "Old Bai, there's no need to be so anxious." Nongzhu looked at Yu Qianqiu and said, "If I leave, what will happen to him?" "Leave now, don't make me say more." Bai Changchun looked at the boundless 1,000-mile lake, and nodded slightly as he looked around. His usually cold face actually maintained a faint smile. Occasionally, a trace of reluctance and longing could be seen in his moving eyes, but it disappeared in a flash. After looking around, his expression suddenly became resolute, and his eyes suddenly looked towards the east. His bright and spirited eyes revealed an unswerving determination to pursue. Chapter 704. Nongju stood there for a long time with a complicated expression. Then, she walked away resolutely, threw out a ship-shaped flying celestial device, and jumped on it. Nongju stood at the bow of the ship with her back to Bai Changchun, motionless and silent. Yu Qianqiu sighed slightly and pushed Furong and Zi towards the flying celestial device. Furong was at a loss, while Zi kept looking back with tears in her eyes. After Yu Qianqiu half forcibly put them on the celestial device, Zi finally couldn't help but kneel down. She leaned on the string of the ship and cried bitterly, "Senior Bai." No matter how sad Zi was crying, the celestial device flew into the sky with a whoosh. Nongju didn't look back from beginning to end. She didn't even say a word. She just stood straight at the bow of the ship and drove the celestial device towards the south. Yu Qianqiu quietly walked to Bai Changchun and said, "Master, they're gone." He was obviously talking nonsense. With Bai Changchun's cultivation, how could he not know that they're gone? Bai Changchun looked back at Yu Qianqiu expressionlessly and nodded. Yu Qianqiu took a few steps back, cupped his hands and bowed to him solemnly. When he straightened up again, the person in front of him had already disappeared. A black spot in the sky quickly disappeared towards the east. Shuntian Island suddenly became very quiet. Yu Qianqiu slowly turned around and looked around. The sun was still shining, the 1,000-mile lake was still sparkling, the wind was still blowing, and the grass and trees on the island were still lush and swaying gently. When his eyes fell on the big house in the center of the island, he stopped. The old man who had been sitting in the house for thousands of years had really left. This place belonged to him now. It was like a dream. He actually became the master of this place. What an incredible thing. He was now the 108th torture master of the demon ghost region. Yu Qianqiu suddenly felt suffocated. He suddenly turned to the east and shouted loudly, "Master." His voice echoed in all directions. He suddenly ran to the lakeside, opened his arms and sang loudly towards the boundless 1,000-mile lake. The great river flows to the east. The stars in the sky join the Big Dipper. We're leaving just like that. You have it, I have it, we have it all. Seeing injustice on the road, he roared. When it's time to make a move, make a move. Rushing through the 9 prefectures. Hey, 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 F***ck your mother. Before he could finish his song, he ended it with a curse. After singing, shouting, and scolding, he finally felt a lot more comfortable in his heart. Yu Qianqiu began to calm down. He stood silently by the side of the 1,000-mile lake and gazed into the distance. The blush on his cheeks gradually faded away and returned to normal. On a tall magnolia tree not far away, pure white magnolia flowers bloomed all over the branches, bathing in the sunlight and gently swaying. Lady Mu, who was dressed in snow-white clothes, stood under the tree in a reserved manner. She looked even more delicate than Mulan, who was on the branch. Looking at the lonely silhouette by the lake, he hesitated for a long time before walking over. He came to the back of Yu Qianqiu and asked softly, "Mister, has the punishment envoy left? Will he come back?" His voice was trembling. She clearly saw what happened here just now. She saw what she shouldn't have seen, and heard what she shouldn't have heard. She used to be a demon king, so she was naturally more sensible than Hibiscus. Although she didn't know where Bai Changchun was going, she vaguely guessed that he wouldn't come back. Yu Qianqiu snorted coldly. His calm face, which was facing the 1,000-mile lake, instantly changed and became covered with a layer of frost. A majestic, gloomy, and terrifying aura instantly erupted from his upright body and directly enveloped Lady Mu. Endless coldness, endless despair, endless death. All kinds of extremely terrifying negative emotions directly impacted Lady Mu's body and mind. Lady Mu almost instantly lost her desire to live and was about to suffocate. Trembling all over, she directly knelt on the ground and swayed. Her eyes were wide open, and she looked at Yu Qianqiu with infinite fear. She had never imagined that the amiable Mr. Yu would be so terrifying. Just the powerful aura erupting from his body was terrifying enough to kill her. Just how terrifying was the cultivation he was concealing? She had never seen such a terrifying aura in her life. Today was the first time in her life that the man in front of her suddenly made her feel that he was even more terrifying than the Lord Torture Envoy. Yu Qianqiu slowly turned around and stared at Lady Mu, who was kneeling on the ground. He said indifferently with no expression on his face, "The Lord Torture Envoy has left. Do you have any ideas?" "No. No. I was just asking. I was wrong. I was wrong. Sir, please spare my life." Lady Mu's face was pale, but she forced herself not to collapse and tried hard to reply. She knew that she had asked something she shouldn't have. If she didn't explain clearly, the man in front of her could take her life at any time. It would be as easy as killing an ant. She didn't need to doubt him at all. "From today onwards, I am the new torture envoy of the demon domain." Yu Qianqiu turned around and faced the 1,000-mile lake again. With his back facing Lady Mu, he said, "Do you have any objections?" Lady Mu trembled and bowed with difficulty. I pay my respects to the Lord Torture Envoy." As soon as she finished speaking, she suddenly felt that the terrifying aura had suddenly become stronger. It was so strong that she didn't even have the slightest thought of resisting and directly fainted. When she woke up, she found that the sun was still high in the sky. Obviously, she hadn't fainted for long. She checked her physical condition and found that there was nothing wrong with her except for being a little weak. Obviously, the new Lord Torture Envoy had already spared her. She tilted her head and found that Yu Qianqiu was still standing by the lake. She immediately got up and knelt down. "Thank you, Lord Torture Envoy, for sparing my life. Lady Mu, you haven't given me a massage for a long time." Yu Qianqiu turned around and chuckled. Then, he took off his clothes and jumped into the lake, swimming 2 rounds naked. Lady Mu was stunned. She couldn't get used to the Lord Torture Envoy's reaction, but she understood what he meant by a massage. She immediately walked to the lakeside and gently took off her clothes. In the blink of an eye, an alluring and delicate body appeared. She slowly walked into the lake, and with a wave of her hand, she smoothed out a half-exposed rock on the lake's surface. Yu Qianqiu turned around and swam back, lying directly on the rock. Half of his body was on the rock in the water, while the other half was exposed to the sun. Naked, Lady Mu leaned over and let him massage her slender fingers. She asked softly, "My lord, how's the strength?" Yu Qianqiu narrowed his eyes and grunted. He seemed to be enjoying it very much. His mind was filled with all sorts of nonsense. "I don't have to be cautious in Shantian Island anymore. I'm in charge of my territory, how great." His head, which was resting on his arms, tilted over and said, "When you're free, go find the Demon King and the Ghost King to get some fresh fruits. Use a little more strength." "Yes." Lady Mu didn't show any abnormality on her face, but she was filled with caution and reverence in her heart. She was ready to sacrifice herself at any time, but Yu Qianqiu didn't seem to have any intention of touching her at all. After Bai Chongqun left, the demon domain became someone's territory. Someone immediately turned the sky upside down and created an unprecedented scene in the demon domain. Sunbathing in the 1,000-mile lake and being massaged by beauties. Such a simple life. The big house in the center of the island silently watched the lively scene by the lake. The open door seemed to be letting out a soundless roar. In the territory of the Hua Xia Empire, the flames of war reached the sky. Wherever Shi Wenguang pointed his sword, the army was invincible. The imperial army didn't even have the strength to fight back. The overwhelming victory made Shi Wenguang's army very spirited. They played a triumphant song all the way. They attacked cities and conquered territories as if they were taking something out of their pocket, and the territory they occupied kept expanding. The imperial court had long been in a panic. They forcefully recruited able-bodied men to replenish the army that was constantly losing in an attempt to protect the shrinking territory. However, the empire was on the verge of collapse, and the hearts of the people were changing. Who could turn the tide for the rotten regime? The various sects in the Huaxia cultivation world watched coldly from the sidelines. They were somewhat curious as to why the Fu Xian Island hadn't taken any action yet. Could it be that they were just going to let the imperial power change in the secular world? When the news that Shi Wenguang's backer was Yu Qianqiu spread, the various sects came to a sudden realization. It was a critical moment. The Fu Xian Island had no choice but to swallow their anger. For a moment, the Fu Xian Island became the joke of the various sections. Back then, they had unceremoniously expelled Yu Qianqiu from the sect. Now, they were finally going to drink the bitter wine that they brewed themselves. However, the attention of the various sects quickly shifted away from this matter. No one cared about the war in the secular world anymore. This was because a piece of news suddenly spread from the various countries. Moreover, it spread like wildfire. It was hard for the Huaxia cultivation world not to know about it. The #1 expert in the world, Bai Changchun, was going to enter the mysterious East Holy Land. Since the news had spread, the ins and outs of the matter were quickly investigated. The various sects in the Huaxia cultivation world finally understood that the #1 expert in the world was from Huaxia. Moreover, he had been secretly protecting Huaxia. Therefore, the soul formation experts of the various countries hadn't made a move yet. However, once Bai Changchun left, the various countries would definitely launch an all-out attack on the Huaxia cultivation world. For a moment, the various sects in Huaxia panicked. They knew that their good days were coming to an end. At this moment, the various countries were forcefully restraining their disciples. They strictly ordered them not to cause any trouble. Otherwise, they would be severely punished. This was because Bai Changchun's temper was very scary. At this critical moment of his departure, it was possible that he would swiftly reorganize the cultivation world by dealing with the aftermath. This was not just a rumor. It was very possible. Whenever something involved Bai Changchun, the commotion caused would make everyone tremble in fear for a long time. Therefore, no one wanted to provoke Bai Changchun at this moment. For a moment, the entire cultivation world had a rare peace. Everyone was polite and lived in harmony. However, there was also a place that was not peaceful. Within the borders of Lingfang Valley, all the disciples of Lingfang Valley, together with the thousands of Wen clan disciples that Wen Lanfeng brought, spent a few days searching back and forth within Lingfang Valley several times. They almost turned over every barren mountain and remote corner. However, to Lu Yanqing's disappointment, Xan Laosan and Yan Zhuixing, who had stolen the 7-star blood orchid, seemed to have disappeared into thin air. Not even a trace of them could be found. Chapter 705. In fact, both Lu Yanqing and Wen Lanfeng knew that Yan Zhuixing and Xan Laosan had probably escaped. Even if they didn't escape, they couldn't find them under such a large-scale search. The hope of finding them again was slim. However, Xan Laosan refused to give up. He led the disciples of Lingfang Valley and Wen family to continue searching frantically. Everyone could understand his feelings. 3 of his brothers had died, and one of them might even die. How could he not be anxious? At the peak of the herb hut, 2 figures stood in front of the cliff under the setting sun. One was tall, the other graceful. The lush Lingfang Valley was dyed with a layer of red and yellow by the setting sun, For the next few days, Lu Yanqing stood here most of the time, looking at the deserted Lingfang Valley with a frown. When Lanfeng sighed softly, "Yanqing, since it's already happened, let's get over it. The eldest, second, fourth, eighth and ninth are all anxious. I'm useless as a master. I can't even protect the disciples under my nose. I'm sorry. If it wasn't for the eldest, second, fourth and eighth going out to collect herbs recently, I'm afraid." Lu Yanqing shook her head in pain. When Lanfeng comforted her, "It's not your fault. Who knew that after Yan Juixing escaped from cornucopia, he would hide in your Lingfang Valley? Otherwise, he would have attracted a group of people to hunt him down. How could we allow him to cause trouble here? No, it's all my fault." Lu Yanqing muttered to herself, "If I didn't stop Yu Qianqiu at cornucopia, there wouldn't be today." Do you remember what Yu Qianqiu said at that time? He said, "You let the people of Ice Palace go today. If the people of Ice Palace hurt Lingfang Valley in the future, I hope you won't regret it." Ha! She looked back at Wen Lanfeng with a sad smile and said, "It's really a prophecy." Unfortunately, he was right. Wen Lanfeng, don't you think I deserve it? Wen Lanfeng was startled. That's not true. Don't listen to that guy's nonsense. Speaking of Yu Qianqiu, Lu Yanqing seemed to have thought of something. Her self-reproachful expression became a little more restrained, and she said in a bleak tone, "I reckon that Lao San is no longer in the Lingfang Valley. Let your Wen family's disciples withdraw. Bai Changchun is about to leave, and many people are rushing to see him off. You should also go and see him off. Let's keep looking. If you don't look for it, then there's no hope of finding it." Wen Lanfeng tactfully refused. In fact, he also wanted to take this opportunity to accompany Lu Yanqing. Seeing that Lu Yanqing still wanted to persuade him, he couldn't help but smile and said, "Everyone knows what those people who are going to send Bai Changchun off are thinking. They just want to personally see Bai Changchun enter the eastern sacred land so that they can plan for the future. Otherwise, they won't be able to eat or sleep well. I won't join in the fun, lest Bai Changchun misunderstands." Lu Yanqing paused for a moment and nodded slightly. As the two of them chatted, they began to guess who would succeed as the Demon Realm's torture master. Under the night sky, in the vast land of Di Rong Kingdom, there were undulating mountains. Some were steep, some were tall and some were flat. Under the cover of the white snow, they had lost their edges and corners, forming a gentle and beautiful white curve. The bright moonlight reflected off the pure white snow, forming a silver light all over the mountains. This was a world of snow, and the cultivation world called this place the Great Snow Mountain. On the highest peak of the towering mountain, a majestic palace made of ice stood tall. Under the moonlight, the ice palace was sparkling, showing off its cold and poignant beauty on the peak of the mountain. And this seemingly cold ice palace, in fact, was loose on the outside but tense on the inside. The 6 disciples of Bing Qingzi were carefully watching the outside of the palace, and third Exayan was among them. Yen Bugui anxiously paced back and forth in the palace. He was able to come here thanks to the 2 disciples of Bing Qingzi, a group of disciples of the Ice Palace, and a group of old subordinates who risked their lives to escort him out of the Limitless Island. However, the moment he arrived here, he coincidentally saw Yan Juixing, who was personally escorted by Bing Qingzi. It was a good thing for a father and son to meet each other, but Yan Juixing's appearance really shocked Yen Bugui. His son looked haggard and had lost an arm, which instantly made Yen Bugui's heart feel like it was being cut by a knife. He had nothing now. His home was gone, and the Limitless Island was gone. If his son was gone, he really didn't know where to go. Bing Qingzi had brought Yan Juixing into the secret room for 3 whole days, and there was no news at all. How could he not be anxious? Below the Ice Palace, in the secret room deep inside the mountain, it was covered by a soundproof enchantment. At this moment, inside the soundproof enchantment, the smell of blood was so strong that it was pungent, and there was an endless mournful scream, which made one's hair stand on end. Bing Qingzi looked at Yan Zhuixing, who was in a small blood pool in front of him with a solemn face. The one who was screaming was none other than Yan Zhuixing himself. Yan Zhuixing's naked body was soaked in the blood pool, and the blood had submerged up to his chest. He was crazily shaking his head and screaming in the blood pool. His face was hideous, and he seemed to be in extreme pain. At the place where one of his arms was cut off, more than half of his arm had already grown out. At the place where his arm was cut off, there were red granules wriggling disgustingly, like a pile of earthworms, which was disgusting to look at. He was using the blood demon body refining technique to regrow his lost arm, even though Bing Qingzi had a firm mind. After listening to Yan Zhuixing's mournful scream for a whole day, he couldn't help but frown. However, for Yan Zhuixing's safety, he had to protect him personally. He really couldn't let any accidents happen to him. Speaking of which, he had to thank Bai Changchun for successfully saving Yan Zhuixing this time. If it wasn't for Bai Changchun going to the East Holy Land and keeping all the forces quiet, it would have been really difficult for him to successfully bring Yan Zhuixing back. After receiving the distress message from Yan Zhuixing, who was forced into a corner, he rushed over at top speed. Coincidentally, the Spirit Fong Valley was conducting a large-scale search of the mountain. The seriously injured Yan Zhuixing was hiding here and there, not knowing where to hide. Bing Qingzi's timely appearance resolved the crisis. With his profound cultivation, he quietly brought Yan Zhuixing back. In fact, Yan Zhuixing had to thank Third Xian for escaping capture. If it wasn't for Third Xian's familiarity with the terrain of the Spirit Fong Valley and helping Yan Zhuixing hold on until Bing Qingzi arrived, he would still be in trouble. Speaking of which, Bing Qingzi still had to thank one person, and that was Wen Lanfeng. Fortunately, Wen Lanfeng only cared about Lu Yanqing and kept her company. If Wen Lanfeng had also participated in the search of the mountain, Bing Qingzi's movements would probably not have escaped Wen Lanfeng's notice. All these coincidences could only mean that Yan Zhuixing was not fated to die. A day later, the scream in the secret room disappeared. In the blood pool, Yan Zhuixing, who was covered in blood, opened his healthy arms and laughed wildly without concealment. After calming down, Yan Zhuixing bowed to Bing Qingzi and said, "Thank you for saving me, master. Otherwise, Zhuixing would not have been able to escape. You should have used the protective jade pendant I gave you earlier. Why did you have to use it only when you had no other choice?" Bing Qingzi casually scolded him and did not say much. But then he slightly frowned and said, "Your cultivation. Why did it drop?" Although the blood demon body refining technique has the magical function of reattaching broken limbs, it also causes great damage to the cultivation. It is expected that my cultivation would drop from the middle stage of crossing calamity to the early stage. But I hate it. If it wasn't for you, Qianqiu, how could I do this? Yan Zhuixing suddenly opened his arms and roared madly, "You Qianqiu, I will not let you go." Unfortunately, Yu Qianqiu could not hear this sentence. Otherwise, he would definitely jump up and say, "Who's afraid of who?" Because he did not expect Yan Zhuixing to let him go. Since they were sworn enemies, he would continue to fight to the death. In the big house of the demon ghost region, Yu Qianqiu was lying on the ground, but there was an elastic thigh under his head, which belonged to Miss Mu. At this time, Miss Mu was carrying a plate of red fruits, picking them one by one and sending them to Yu Qianqiu's mouth. The latter smacked his lips a few times, waved his hand to stop the hands that continued to send him red fruits, and got up with a sigh. He leaned against the door frame weakly, spat out the fruit skin, and looked around aimlessly. He was really bored out of his wits. He had no choice. Although there were beauties serving him and his life was comfortable, there were only 2 people on the island. After a few days, he found that he was bored out of his mind. As a new official, he also wanted to guard the demon ghost region majestically like Bai Changchun and have a taste of being a torture envoy. But now he found that it was a mistake to learn from Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun could stay here year after year, but he found that he lost his patience after only a few days. How was this different from being in jail? In jail, many of his cellmates would brag, but Miss Mu was not one to brag. I wonder if Master has left. Yu Qianqiu leaned against the door frame like a resentful woman and muttered to himself, then disappeared. Teleportation. Miss Mu's expression turned serious. The new torture envoy had indeed concealed his cultivation on purpose. He was not as superficial as he usually appeared, but had hidden his strength well. In the vast East Sea, there was an island named Xianxian. It was the territory of Nanming Ancestor, one of the 4 great men of the cultivation world. It was shrouded in smoke all year round, and the red light shone without end, and the sound of knocking could be heard. On the main peak of Xianxian Island, Bai Changchun, dressed in a green robe, stood alone with his hands behind his back. His eyes were slightly closed on his thin face. He was waiting quietly, waiting for the opening of the East Holy Land. Suddenly, he opened his eyes and slowly turned around. He frowned and said, "What are you doing here?" A person suddenly appeared behind him. At this moment, he was frozen on the spot like a fossil, not moving at all. Even his eyeballs could not move. This person was none other than Yu Qianqiu. After finding his master's location, he had just appeared, and before he could react, he immediately discovered that the surrounding air currents had suddenly moved. They pressed down on him like metal, making him unable to move. He did not even have a chance to resist. This was because Bai Changchun had discovered it early. Otherwise, if someone had suddenly appeared behind him, and he did not stop in time, Yu Qianqiu might have become a meat patty. The air currents that clamped down on him loosened, and Yu Qianqiu regained his freedom. He quickly panted and said, "Master, I'm here to send you off." "Why did you attack me?" He was full of resentment, and it felt like his kindness was taken as malicious intent. However, he did not think about it. In this world, who could get close to Bai Changchun without being discovered? He had suddenly appeared out of thin air in Utopia and got close to Bai Changchun. Thus, Bai Changchun had subconsciously treated him as an expert and reacted immediately. Luckily, he had stopped in time and did not cause any mishaps. Bai Changchun had never wasted his breath on such topics, and he could not be bothered to explain to him. He asked expressionlessly, "Is this the miraculous effect you mentioned when you gave me those silver balls?" Chapter 706. Yes, Master. Yu Qianqiu's face was full of pride, as if he was asking. "Awesome, right?" Bai Changchun nodded slightly and turned around expressionlessly, as if he had no interest in this kind of thing. This immediately dampened Yu Qianqiu's enthusiasm. If anyone knew that the golden bead had such a magical function, wouldn't they ask until the very end? Who would be as indifferent as him? Whoosh whoosh. A gust of wind from the south suddenly blew, and the hazy red fog that enveloped the island slowly drifted to the north. Yu Qianqiu stood behind Bai Changchun and looked around. The fog dispersed. His vision gradually became clear, and the appearance of the entire Xianxian Island appeared in front of him. "Master, is this Xianxian Island?" Yu Qianqiu looked around and asked. Bai Changchun softly replied with a "hmm." Suddenly, Yu Qianqiu's pupils shrank. Bai Changchun was facing the east, and there was a vast expanse of white fog. It was boundless, and it was connected to the sea and the sky. No one knew how big the area was. Compared to this boundless sea of fog, Xianxian Island was probably not even a small place. The two were separated by the sea, and the distance between them might be less than 10 miles. The wind blew away the surrounding fog, but it couldn't blow away the vast sea of fog in front of it. It was ethereal, serene, and mysterious. "That is the East Holy Land," Yu Qianqiu murmured. Bai Changchun once again replied with a and looked down the mountain. Yu Qianqiu subconsciously followed his gaze and saw two figures rushing over. In the blink of an eye, they arrived at the top of the mountain. When one of them saw Yu Qianqiu, he and Yu Qianqiu spoke at the same time. "Why are you here?" This person was none other than Nongzhu. After he made arrangements for Zi and Furong, he immediately rushed over here. However, after the two of them asked, they didn't reply and turned their heads to the side like enemies. The man standing next to Nongzhu was sizing up Yu Qianqiu, and Yu Qianqiu was also attracted by his weird costume. It was a tall, barefooted old man. His face was old, but his body was muscular and his skin was bronze. His face was full of whiskers, each strand of hair standing straight up like a hedgehog. What was even more spectacular was that his hair, beard, and eyebrows were all crimson red. He was only wearing a pair of large underpants, and the underpants were also red. He had the appearance of a strange person. The old man opened his big eyes and looked at Yu Qianqiu curiously. "Nongzhu, who is this? I don't think I've seen him before. He looks unfamiliar." He found it strange. There were only a handful of people in the world who were qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun and speak. Furthermore, this person looked so young, and he immediately suspected that he was Bai Changchun's disciple. Nongzhu chuckled and said, "Old man Nanming, take a guess." His words immediately confirmed Yu Qianqiu's guess. He immediately bowed and said, "Junior Yu Qianqiu greets Nanming ancestor." "Ah." Nanming ancestor was stunned for a moment, then he laughed and said, "I knew it. No wonder you're Bai Changchun's disciple. No wonder you could break into Xian Island without being discovered. I was reckless." Yu Qianqiu was unusually humble. Nanming ancestor waved his hand and said, "It's all right, it's all right. I've long heard of your name. Now that I've seen you today, you really live up to your reputation." He was a little tired. Why couldn't he see through his cultivation? Nongzhu also felt that it was a little strange. With Yu Qianqiu's cultivation, he shouldn't be able to hide from the protection of Xian Island, right? Nanming ancestor was a straightforward person. He couldn't figure it out, so he couldn't help but ask, "Yu Qianqiu, what's your cultivation? I'm a little clumsy to not be able to see through your cultivation." Nongzhu chuckled and thought, it would be strange if you could see through it. Even Bai Changchun couldn't see through it. Yu Qianqiu rolled his eyes at him. He then took out a porcelain bottle from his storage bag and respectfully gave it to Nanming ancestor. He said, "I've just arrived here, so I didn't prepare anything because I came in a hurry. Here is a bottle of breath-concealing pill that I personally refined. After taking one, you can hide your cultivation for 10 days. I have no respect for you. It's just a breath-concealing pill, so please accept it." Nanming ancestor revealed an expression of understanding. At the same time, he was very satisfied with this kid who gave him a gift as soon as he met him. He then reached out to take it and said, "Then I won't stand on ceremony. If you have time, come to Xian Island to play." Although breath-concealing pill wasn't a miraculous pill, it was a rare item that had long been lost. With a bottle in hand, it might come in handy in the future. Naturally, he had to accept it. Nongzhu, who was at the side, was unhappy. She pulled a long face and said in a deep voice, "You promised to give me a bottle, but you haven't given it to me yet. Are you going to drag it until—" "Ah." Before he could finish, Yu Qianqiu threw a porcelain bottle at him and stopped him from talking nonsense. Nanming ancestor raised his red eyebrows. He could tell that these two guys didn't get along. Coincidentally, he and Nongzhu didn't get along well either. The enemy of my enemy is my friend." He immediately laughed and patted Yu Qianzhou's shoulder, praising, "Not bad, not bad." Half of Yu Qianzhou's body trembled from the slap, but he still squeezed out an awkward smile and said, "Senior, you flatter me, you flatter me." Bai Changchun quietly faced the vast sea of fog, turning a deaf ear to the conversation between the three. 100 miles away from Xian Island, there were more than 10 large flying artifacts floating in the sky and sea. These flying magic tools were all soul formation stage lords from various countries. There were more than 100 of them, and they were all gathered together in their respective circles. For example, Pei Fong, Qi Zhujuan, and O Yangda were all there. The blue sky and white clouds floated, and the blue sea surged. The scenery was really good. However, everyone's attention wasn't on this. Most of the time, they were focused on the vast sea of fog between the blue sea and blue sky. However, they didn't see any movement until now. O Yangda, who was standing side by side with Pei Fong and Qi Zhujuan, suddenly turned around and walked away. He flicked his sleeves and said, "When is this damn East Holy Land going to open? We've waited for more than 10 days, why is there still no movement?" Pei Fong squinted his eyes and looked into the distance. He hugged his stomach and laughed, "Old Ouyang, don't be impatient. Isn't Bai Changchun already at Xian Island? Since he's here, it means that the East Holy Land is going to open soon." Qi Zhujuan turned around expressionlessly and said, "We've already waited for so many years. Why would we care about waiting for a few more days?" He had always been like this. No matter what, there was almost no expression on his face. Although the three of them had been together for a long time, their temperaments and personalities had never been affected by one another. Pei Fong always had a smile on his face. The other two didn't talk much, but O Yangda's temper was a little fiery, and Qi Zhujuan's thoughts were always hard to guess. He was always cold and calm. There was no one else on the flying artifact that the three demigod final stage experts were on. Under normal circumstances, there weren't many people qualified to stand with them. If they weren't summoned by them, how many people would be able to participate in the conversation between the three of them? The former top 10 experts were now incomplete. Of course, Bai Changchun was an exception, because the situation was just the opposite. It wasn't that Bai Changchun wasn't qualified to talk to the three of them, but the three of them weren't qualified to talk to Bai Changchun. As for the others, Wen Lanfeng and Bing Qingzi didn't come. The one who came, Hu Changshou, was standing with a group of demigod mid-stage lords with a gloomy face. However, he didn't seem to have anything in common with them, so it was very awkward. Ha! Look at how ugly Hu Changshou's face is. Pei Fong glanced at them and laughed. The other two looked over as well, and they snorted disdainfully. At this moment, the 100 or so spirit-severing lords all turned around to look at the source of the voice. They saw a dense group of flying artifacts coming from behind. Everyone looked at each other. Someone asked curiously, "Why are there so many people? Who's here to join in the fun?" Everyone was confused. Obviously, they didn't know. However, when those flying artifacts got closer, the demigod lords were speechless. There were at least 300 to 400 flying artifacts, and the cultivation of the people standing on them was too low for them to look at. The highest cultivation was at the end of the tribulation passing stage, and there were many at the tribulation passing stage. There were also many at the nascent soul stage. Everyone looked at each other and asked each other which sect they were from, but they all shook their heads, indicating that they didn't know them. Suddenly, someone said in surprise, "Look at their clothes. They seem to be from the Huaxia cultivation world." On one of the artifacts, Yunnan Tian, who was dressed in a snow-white fluffy robe, walked to the back of the ship and asked indifferently, "Who are you? Come forward and answer me." Although his voice was soft, it penetrated the group of people who were dozens of meters away. Those people seemed to stop when they saw the people here. They all looked surprised because no one could see the cultivation of any of the people on the flying artifacts in front of them. When they heard the question, they gathered again. When they were about 10 meters away, a flying artifact appeared with 5 to 6 people on it. It was the people from Fuxian Island. Feng Xiangtian walked to the front of the ship and forced himself to calm down. He cupped his hands and said, "I'm Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. I'm here to send off Senior Bai. May I know who you are?" He had already vaguely guessed who these people were. It would be a lie to say that he wasn't afraid, but he was the sect leader of the number 1 sect in Huaxia. How could he show weakness in front of everyone? As soon as he finished speaking, the lords of the various countries burst into laughter, all of them shaking their heads with mocking expressions. The hundreds of people didn't care about the thousands of people standing in front of them at all. Someone even insulted, "They really don't know what's good for them. How dare they come here to die?" The elegant Yunantian looked back at the person who spoke and realized that it was Yan Ji from Shushui country. He sneered, "Yan Ji, if you really have the ability, why don't you go out and kill them all now? It's a piece of cake to kill them." Yan Ji was suddenly stunned. Then, he flew into a rage and said, "Yunantian, what do you mean?" Yunantian said with a faint smile, "I don't mean anything. I just want to fulfill your wish. If you don't dare to, don't say such shameless words." You. Yan Ji wanted to say something but was stopped by Hua Zhongming and the others. Bai Changchun hadn't left yet. If Yan Ji started killing the people of Huaxia cultivation world now, Bai Changchun would probably start killing soon. Chapter 707. Yunantian ignored Yan Ji and turned to Feng Xiangtian with a smile. "So you're Huaxia cultivators, please go ahead." He didn't introduce himself and everyone else, as he didn't want to waste time talking. After all, the difference in cultivation was too big. The so-called supporting Immortal Island sect leader wasn't even worth mentioning in his eyes. But then again, with his identity, he was already very cultured to speak so politely to Feng Xiangtian. Although he didn't say everyone's identity, Feng Xiangtian and the others already knew. Especially when the two of them were arguing just now, Yunantian and Yan Ji's names made the Huaxia cultivators' hearts jump. These were the names of the soul formation realm lords of the various countries. "Then I won't disturb you all." Feng Xiangtian didn't dare to show any temper. He cupped his hands at Yunantian and the others respectfully. He led the group of people and turned, wanting to go around these terrifying people. The various countries' lords looked at these Huaxia cultivators who were trembling like chickens and sneered. It wasn't convenient to touch them now, but once Bai Changchun went to the East Holy Land, these people would undoubtedly be lambs waiting to be slaughtered. They wouldn't be able to run even if they wanted to. Hua Zhongming, who was holding Yan Ji, looked at the Huaxia cultivators floating away in front of him expressionlessly. However, his eyes suddenly lit up. He saw that there were several women standing on one of the flying artifacts. One of them was a woman dressed in white. She was a rare beauty in this world. He couldn't help but shout, "Stop!" The various countries' lords all looked at Hua Zhongming. Yan Ji, who was beside him, was even more confused. This guy told him that now wasn't the time to cause trouble, so why did he start again? The Huaxia cultivators all stopped in fear. The leading flying artifact from supporting Immortal Island floated back. Feng Xiangtian braced himself and asked Hua Zhongming, "May I know what advice this senior has for us?" He had no choice but to stand up for Hua Zhongming. After all, he was the sect master of the number 1 sect. Hua Zhongming, who was wearing light yellow thin clothes and barefooted, waved his hand in an elegant manner and said, "It's none of your business." His eyes were fixed on the beautiful woman in the crowd. Everyone followed his gaze and suddenly came to a realization. He must have seen a stunning beauty. No wonder. It must be known that Hua Zongming was a person who was famous for his love for beauties. His great light palace was called a den of lust behind his back because he kept many beautiful women. It wasn't hard to guess what he liked by looking at his clothes that didn't fit his style. In fact, it wasn't just Hua Zongming. Many people's eyes lit up when they saw that woman. That woman was none other than the leader of the Moon Clan, Chonghua Fairy. She was famous for her looks in the cultivation world of Huaxia. This was also because Bai Hua Fairy wasn't here, otherwise a pair of beauties would definitely be a feast for the eyes. Jade Flower Fairy's expression changed slightly. She naturally noticed Hua Zongming's lecherous gaze, and he was not the only one. Although she was angry, she was even more terrified because she couldn't afford to offend anyone here. He could only tilt his head to the side and pretend that he didn't see anything. The reason why the Huaxia cultivators were here was naturally because they heard that Bai Changchun was going to the Eastern Holy Land. Therefore, the leaders of the various sects contacted each other and came together to see him off, to thank Bai Changchun for protecting the Huaxia cultivation world for so many years. Of course, this was just a nice thing to say. The main reason was that every torture master of the Ghost region was a top expert who could shake the cultivation world. The next torture master would probably be no worse. The hundreds of sect leaders had come here and put on such a grand show because they wanted to show respect to Senior Bai. Or rather, they wanted to play the pity card, hoping that Senior Bai could speak to the next enforcer and continue to protect the world of cultivators in Huaxia. According to their thinking, since Bai Changchun could take care of the Huaxia cultivation world for so many years, it was obvious that he had deep feelings for the Huaxia cultivation world. They believed that if they came together to beg him, he wouldn't really ignore them. Therefore, this scene happened. However, their thinking was just wishful thinking. Bai Changchun didn't take care of the Huaxia cultivation world like they thought. First of all, when they saw Bai Changchun later, it was still uncertain whether he would talk to them or not. Second, once Bai Changchun left, it would be difficult for them to leave this place safely. Jade Flower Fairy had just turned her head to one side when a white figure suddenly appeared in front of her. She was a little surprised, but then she saw clearly who it was. It was the elegant man in a fluffy white robe who talked to Feng Xiangtian just now. He was looking at her deeply. Jade Flower Fairy was suddenly at a loss. She couldn't scold him, let alone beat him. Sorry to disturb you, Fairy. Yunantian bowed politely and said, I am Yunantian, the Lord of Lu Nangua. It is my honor to meet you today. I wonder if I have the honor to know your name. Jade Flower Fairy bit her lips and bowed. I am Jade Flower, the leader of the Moon Clan. Nice to meet you, Senior. Hua Zongming's face darkened. He didn't expect that Yunantian would take advantage of him after he stopped these people. Among the lords, many people were already snickering. They all knew that Yunantian was not a good guy. There was a reason why he only accepted female disciples in his clan. Those who knew the truth all knew that the relationship between Yunantian and the female disciples he accepted was not clear. It was just that, apart from cultivators at the last stage of the semi-god realm, Yunantian's cultivation was considered high compared to the other lords. Everyone gave him some face and few people talked nonsense. Ha! Yunantian really doesn't change. Pei Fong smiled at Qi Zhejuan and Ouyangde, who were beside him. He then shouted loudly, Brother Yu, calm down for the time being. If there is anything, we can talk about it later. Please come over and have a chat. He did not want Yunantian to cause any trouble now, lest everyone was implicated. Yunantian glanced at Pei Fong and bowed to Jade Flower Fairy. Oh, the famous Jade Flower Fairy. Nice to meet you. I will talk to you again when I have the chance. After that, he stepped back and teleported to the flying ritual implement where Pei Fong was. He glared at Pei Fong and said grumpily, What's the matter? Pei Fong shouted to the people of the Huaxia cultivation world, "Let's go. Don't make trouble for yourselves." As soon as he spoke, no one stopped the Huaxia cultivators. A group of people quickly flew away. At this time, Pei Fong turned to Yunnan Tian and said with a smile, "Brother Yu, in terms of appearance, who in the world can compare to Lu Yanqing?" As soon as these words came out, many people couldn't help but burst into laughter. Everyone knew that Yunnan Tian had once pursued Lu Yanqing. Unfortunately, he was beaten up by his rival in love, Wen Lanfeng, and almost lost his life. From then on, Yunnan Tian didn't dare to provoke Lu Yanqing anymore. Pei Fong was obviously exposing his shortcomings. Yunnan Tian snorted coldly and flashed back to his original position. At this moment, everyone's laughter stopped abruptly and they looked around. The whistling sound of the wind gradually became louder, and the blowing sea breeze suddenly became stronger. The strange thing was that this wind wasn't from the north, south, east, or west. It was a little messy, and it became more and more vigorous. When it blew on their faces, it felt like something was slapping their faces. The blue sea below lost its rhythm and gradually became turbulent. Just as everyone was looking at each other in dismay, they suddenly heard the faint rumbling of thunder coming from all around them. Everyone quickly looked around and saw dark clouds coming from the horizon. They came from all directions and seemed to be gathering in this direction. Under the dark clouds, ferocious thunderbolts, dragons, snakes, and flood dragons were shining brightly. They connected the sea and the dark clouds in the sky and were moving quickly. The wind became stronger and was close to a storm. The sea was completely angry and set off monstrous waves. "The East Holy Land is about to open," Pei Fong said with a smile on his face. What he meant was that Bai Changchun was finally leaving. Yang Da and Qi Zhejuan nodded slightly. Many people present had seen the opening of the East Holy Land. They all understood that this was a sign of the opening of the East Holy Land. However, none of the Huaxia cultivators had seen it before. Just as they were dozens of miles away from the feudal lords, they suddenly saw such a change in the sky and sea. All of them looked around in bewilderment. The fog that had just shrouded Xian Island was blown away again. Bai Changchun, who was standing on the peak of the mountain, slowly opened his eyes and looked around with radiance. Nongzhu looked at the dark clouds in the sky and muttered to herself, "Is it going to open soon?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded solemnly and said, "Soon." He had lived on Xian Island for such a long time and had seen the opening of the East Holy Land several times. What he said was naturally correct. When Yu Qianchou heard this, he looked around curiously. He wanted to see how the Holy Land of the East would be opened. Right at this moment, the thunderbolts in the surrounding dark clouds suddenly disappeared at the same time. The wind between heaven and earth swept wildly, and the surrounding dark clouds quickly gathered together. In less than an hour, the entire sky above Xian Island was covered by dark clouds. The last ray of light disappeared, and the world was so dark that one couldn't even see their own fingers. Not long after, thunder rumbled in the sky again, and it was getting more and more intense. The dark clouds in the sky flickered, as if they were brewing something. Suddenly, an intense and dazzling thunderbolt pierced through the dark clouds like a long sword and illuminated the entire world. The dark sky was shrouded by the rolling dark clouds, and the turbulent sea reflected the strong light. Then, a loud bang was heard. It was so loud that even the ground could feel the strong tremors. Yu Qianchou gritted his teeth and felt that he couldn't hear anything. However, his eyes were still wide open as he looked at the place where the thunderbolt struck. It was the clouds that shrouded the East Holy Land no matter how strong the wind was. In the instant that the huge thunderbolt disappeared into the clouds, the world returned to darkness. However, Yu Qianchou could faintly see that the moment the light disappeared, the unmoving cloud seemed to move. Chapter 708. Bang! With a loud explosion, another huge thunderbolt appeared in the dark clouds. The direction it struck was exactly where the previous thunderbolt struck. With the help of the strong light, one could see that the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land, which could not be blown away by the wind, were slowly surging. Before the dazzling light disappeared, another shocking thunderbolt struck at the same location. Once the three thunderbolts appeared, it was as if a fuse had been lit. In an instant, the sky was filled with lightning and thunder. Densely packed green electric snakes flashed in the dark clouds and interweaved like a net. The scene was extremely shocking. Under the lightning, Xian Island was completely lit up. The surrounding sea surface was filled with billowing green light. At this moment, the dark clouds in the sky shouldn't be called dark clouds, but lightning clouds. They were formed by dense lightning. Countless densely packed lightning bolts shot towards the sky above Xian Island and converged into a gigantic thunderbolt. Bang! Once again, the target was the same as the previous three lightning bolts. Yu Qianzhou's eyes widened as he personally saw the clouds shrouding the eastern sacred land rotating slowly. Suddenly, as if the speed of rotation was too slow, earth-shattering explosions resounded. Countless lightning snakes gathered to form huge thunderbolts. They crazily struck out one after another. More and more of them appeared, and the frequency of the strikes also became denser and denser. This scene reminded Yu Qianzhou of a dozen heavy machine guns bombarding the same target. Other than the continuous loud explosion, nothing else could be heard. The dark clouds had turned into a world of thunder and lightning. The lightning shot out wildly, and everywhere was covered in a vast expanse of green. The four people on the main peak of Xian Island could clearly feel the entire mountain beneath their feet shaking. Rocks of all sizes on the mountain were rolling down the mountain. This was because they were not ordinary people. Their cultivation was not weak and they could circulate their energy to resist the tremors. If it was an ordinary person, they would have died from the tremors. Yu Qianzhou, whose cultivation was inferior, had already used his fingers to block his ears. Otherwise, he would not have been able to bear it. Even so, he still felt a little dizzy. He felt that his surroundings were filled with electromagnetism. All the hair on his body stood on end, as if there was an electric current flowing on the surface of his body. Although the Huaxia cultivators who were dozens of kilometers away were already very far away, they could still imagine the shocking scene in that place. All of them were dumbfounded as they looked at the shocking scene in the distance. Suddenly, someone noticed that hundreds of figures were flying towards the place where the lightning flashed and thunder rumbled. The lords of the various countries had already kept their flying artifacts and were flying over quickly. They gathered at a spot several miles away from Xian Island and hovered in the air. Looking at the might of the world before them, even though this was not the first time they had seen it, they still felt their hearts tremble. In that instant, they felt how insignificant they were. In the face of the might of heaven and earth, no matter how high his cultivation was, he was nothing more than an ant in this world. The continuous thunderbolts continued for nearly an hour before they finally calmed down. The wind between the sea and the sky was getting fiercer and fiercer. That was because a huge whirlpool had formed in the sky where the lightning struck. It produced a powerful suction force and stirred up the surrounding airflow. Bai Changchun, Grandmaster Nan Ming, and Nongzhu were like nails nailed to the mountain peak, not moving an inch. On the other hand, Yu Qianzhou was dumbfounded. He could not withstand it with his cultivation. He lost his center of gravity due to the strong wind. His clothes fluttered in the wind, and he felt like he was about to float away with the wind. Nongzhu looked at his bewildered expression and laughed sinisterly. At this moment, Grandmaster Nan Ming's bear-like palm pressed on Yu Qianzhou's shoulder. A warm current flowed into Yu Qianzhou's body, and he immediately stood firmly on the spot like a stake. Yu Qianzhou finally relaxed and could enjoy the scenery with peace of mind. The dense lightning and the dark clouds gradually died out, and the last ray of light between the heavens and the earth disappeared as well. Once again, they were plunged into complete darkness. All that was left in the surroundings was the strong wind blowing ceaselessly. However, Yu Qianqiu could clearly feel that the strong wind was slowly rising into the sky. The sound of the surging waves seemed to be gradually calming down, and it was no longer as impatient. At this moment, Grandmaster Nanming withdrew his palm from Yu Qianqiu's shoulder. Yu Qianqiu stretched out his hand to feel up and down in the darkness. The wind was indeed much weaker, and the whistling sound reached the sky. Ouch! Yu Qianqiu cried out in pain. In the darkness, Nongzhu said angrily, "Yu Qianqiu, is there something wrong with you? How dare you touch my butt?" Yu Qianqiu hurriedly explained, "Don't misunderstand, I don't have that kind of hobby. I really didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind, and I accidentally touched you." Amidst their whispers, Grandmaster Nanming's laughter could be heard. "Wah! Old man Nanming, you!" Nongzhu screamed as her but was pinched by someone. "Don't misunderstand. I didn't do it on purpose. I just wanted to feel the wind," Grandmaster Nanming snickered. Amidst the crackling noises, Nanming ancestors' blood-curdling screams could be heard. Nongzhu roared in anger, "King, feel the wind, is it something you pinched with your hands?" Yu Qianqiu quickly moved away to avoid being affected by the two people. Not long after, a bright white light appeared in the surrounding horizon, and it was expanding rapidly. The dark clouds in the sky were shrinking rapidly. In less than an hour, light once again shone on this part of the sea. The eastern sacred land was originally shrouded in white fog, but now, a black whirlpool appeared in the sky. It sucked in the dark clouds that were as thick as ink, like a tornado pillar. The area of the dark clouds in the sky became smaller and smaller, and they were gradually swallowed by the black whirlpool. After a while, the last piece of dark cloud was sucked in by the whirlpool. The sky returned to being bright and sunny, and the blue waves of the sea rippled normally. The only difference was that above the eastern sacred land, in the whirlpool that was dozens of meters wide, a dense electric web suddenly appeared. It was like a huge beast opening its fangs to devour. After more than 300 years, the eastern sacred land has finally opened. Grandmaster Nanming let out a long sigh. Yu Qianqiu turned his head and saw that his red hair and red beard had become messy as if someone had pulled them. Needless to say, it was definitely done by the furious Nongzhu. There were also many footprints on the buttocks of his red underpants. He reckoned that Nongzhu had something to do with them. Yu Qianqiu didn't have the mood to pay too much attention to this. He looked at the whirlpool that gathered lightning and said in a daze, "This whirlpool is the entrance to the eastern sacred land?" Grandmaster Nanming nodded and said, "That's right. An entrance with no exit can only be maintained for a period of time. After 6 hours, it will automatically close and return to normal. If you want to enter again, you have to wait for the next opening in 300 years. The three of them looked at Bai Changchun at the same time. They saw Bai Changchun, who was standing with his hands behind his back, slowly turn around and stare behind him expressionlessly. The three of them followed his gaze and immediately noticed the group of people several miles away. The cultivation of that group of people wasn't weak. They immediately noticed Bai Changchun looking at them, and they looked at each other guiltily. Pei Fang's fat face twitched, and he smiled awkwardly at the crowd. Bai Changchun is leaving, let's send him off. With him in the lead, more than 100 people quickly flew over. The space at the top of the main peak was limited, and it couldn't accommodate more than 100 people. Furthermore, they didn't dare to stand together with Bai Changchun, so they all landed at the foot of the main peak. All of them sneaked glances at Bai Changchun, but to their surprise, they realized that Yu Qianqiu was actually standing next to Bai Changchun. Grandmaster Nanming and Nongzhu were still acceptable, but that guy had such a big responsibility. What right did he have to stand next to Bai Changchun? Yu Qianqiu stared at the group of soul-forming experts below him, and he felt very pleased. The feeling of looking down at a group of soul-forming experts from a high position was very, very satisfying. Pei Fong cupped his broken palm and said with a smile, "We learned that Brother Bai is leaving, so we specially came to send you off. Nanming, Nongzhu, you're here too. Yo! Brother Yu Qianqiu is here too." Bai Changchun's sharp gaze swept across the people below, and finally, he stared at Pei Fong. He said lightly, "Pei Fong, are you the leader?" His indifferent words immediately scared Pei Fong so much that cold sweat broke out on his back. There were too many meanings in his words, and it was easy for people to misunderstand. Pei Fong's expression changed, and he immediately waved his hand and said, "No, no, we all agreed to come together. We thought that you were going to leave, so we all thought that we should send you off." As he said this, he turned around and asked the people behind him, "What do you think, everyone?" "Yes. Yes. Yes. We should send him off." The group of people replied meekly. None of them dared to raise their voices. Looking at the situation, the people standing at the front couldn't wait to shrink back even more. Now this was majestic. He could scare a group of soul-forming experts like grandchildren. Yu Qianqiu's eyes lit up, and he looked at Bai Changchun with great admiration. Nongzhu, an ancestor of Nanming, looked at each other and shook their heads slightly. Bai Changchun's despotic power had suppressed everyone for too long, causing everyone to be afraid to the bone. One wrong look from him could immediately make a group of people tremble with fear. "In that case, should I thank you for your kindness?" Bai Changchun asked lightly. "No need, no need." Pei Fong squeezed out a smile on his fat face, and he waved his hand repeatedly and said, "We've all been in the cultivation world for so many years. It's only right for us to send you off, it's only right." At this moment, Bai Changchun suddenly looked far away. Everyone followed his gaze and saw a group of densely packed flying artifacts carrying a group of people flying over quickly. It was the group of people from the cultivation world of Huaxia. Led by Feng Xiangtian of Fuxian Island, hundreds of sect masters gathered. The closer they got to Xian Island, the faster their hearts beat. The legendary #1 expert in the world should be in front, but no one had seen him before. When everyone got closer and saw the group of lords on the main peak, they couldn't help but look at the 4 people standing on the peak. To be able to make the lords of the soul-forming realms submit to them, they were naturally extraordinary. Among them, there must be the legendary #1 expert in the world. Chapter 709. Yu Qianqiu was slightly stunned. There were many familiar faces among this group of people from Huaxia. He muttered to himself, "Why are these people here to join in the fun? This isn't a place for you to join in the fun. You can't afford to play." A group of flying artifacts stopped tens of meters away. The feudal lord standing on the second peak stared at these people coldly. The Huaxia cultivators sized up the 4 people standing on the peak anxiously. Many of them were stunned because one of them was very eye-catching. It was hard not to recognize him. The group of people was speechless. Why is Yu Qianqiu here? Moreover, he was standing high above the feudal lords. Not to mention them, even the feudal lords were puzzled when they saw Yu Qianqiu here. Although the Huaxia cultivators didn't recognize Bai Changchun, the temperament of the 4 people was obvious. There was no need to mention Yu Qianqiu. The red-haired, red-bearded, bare-chested old man and the handsome middle-aged man didn't match the image of the world's #1 expert in the legends. Only the green-robed old man had a thin face, and his eyes were filled with a supercilious indifference. He stood there motionlessly, yet he gave off a feeling that he was one with the world. He was probably the #1 person in the world in the legends. Yu Qianqiu stared coldly at Feng Xiangtian, the sect leader of Fuxian Island. He sneered and said, "Sect leader Feng, it's been a long time. I wonder why you're here. Feng Xiangtian was a sect leader, so he wasn't someone who didn't know the severity of the situation. Since Yu Qianqiu could stand here and speak first, he was already not someone Fuxian Island could afford to offend. He didn't care about his reputation anymore. He had to drink the bitter wine he brewed himself. He squeezed out a smile and cupped his hands. Our Huaxia cultivators have been protected by Elder Bai for many years. Today, we heard that Elder Bai is going to the East Holy Land. Huaxia's 373 sect leaders came to send you off as a token of our goodwill. May I know which one is Elder Bai? Please allow us to thank you. The lords of the various countries looked at each other. Even Yu Qianqiu didn't expect nearly 400 sect leaders to come from Huaxia's cultivation world. Didn't that mean all the sects were here? What were these people trying to do? They were here to see Bai Changchun, so Yu Qianqiu couldn't say anything. However, Bai Changchun didn't say anything either. It was as if he hadn't heard anything. At that moment, a flying artifact flew out from the Huaxia's formation, attracting everyone's attention. Yu Qianqiu took a casual glance and immediately recognized them. They were people from the 4 great clans. The 4 clan leaders stood at the front of the flying artifact. The rest of the Chinese cultivation world didn't know Bai Changchun, but the 4 great families' patriarchs had seen him before. Now that the patriarch was in front of them, they naturally had to come out and greet him. Bai Shouji, a descendant of the Bai family, greets the ancestor. Bai Shouji knelt on the flying magic tool in front of everyone with an emotional expression. The 2 Bai clan elders behind him also lifted their long robes in excitement and knelt down to pay their respects. The ancestor's name shook the world. As a descendant, he felt honored. Wu clan, Jing clan, and Tan clan's juniors greet ancestor. The 3 clan leaders and 2 clan elders each knelt. Putting aside the other 3 clans, just Bai Shouji's words alone had shocked everyone. His surname was Bai, and he called Bai Changchun old ancestor. Didn't that mean? Other than Yu Qianqiu and Nongzhu, who were in the know, everyone else, including Nanming old ancestor, were shocked speechless. Especially those from Huaxia's cultivation world, they were all dumbfounded. At that moment, someone vaguely remembered that the 4 clans once had a very powerful figure. However, it was just a rumor without any proof. They didn't expect it to be the world's #1 expert, Bai Changchun. Everyone's gaze moved back and forth between the 4 clans and Bai Changchun. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 clans and sighed. What are you doing here? There was a rare softness in his tone. No matter how ruthless he was, the 4 families in front of him were still his descendants. Now that he was leaving, his future was uncertain. Perhaps after this farewell, he would never have the chance to meet them again. Once Bai Changchun spoke, everyone's guess about the 4 clans became certain. They were really Bai Changchun's descendants. Oh my! He was Bai Changchun. The Huaxia cultivators first looked at Bai Changchun with great respect. Then, they looked at the 4 clans with complicated expressions. All of them cursed in their hearts. The 4 clans hid themselves too well. They had such a powerful backer, but they never revealed it. No wonder the 4 clans always advanced and retreated together. They were a family that wore the same pants. What's more, the sects that had conflicts with the 4 clans and had evil designs on the 4 clans were so scared that they didn't even dare to breathe. Bai Shouji, who was kowtowing, stood up and said excitedly, "Ancestor, I heard that you are going to the Holy East Land. How can the descendants of the 4 clans not come to send you off? Otherwise, we will be scolded by our descendants as unfilial descendants. Please don't be angry, ancestor. Please forgive us." Forget it. Bai Changchun raised his hand at the 4 clans and said, "Get up." "Thank you, ancestor." The 4 clans kowtowed and stood up. They looked at Bai Changchun excitedly. Apart from the 4 clan heads, the other 6 clan elders had never seen Bai Changchun before. Originally, some of the 6 elders had doubts about the 4 clan heads going to the Demon Ghost region to see Bai Changchun. Now, all their doubts were gone. All that was left was excitement. Ancestors' might shook the world. He was truly the world's #1 expert. This glory was enough for future generations to praise and be proud of. Yu Qianqiu. Bai Changchun suddenly called out. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He thought that Bai Changchun wouldn't reveal their master-disciple relationship in front of everyone. However, since he had called out to him in front of everyone, it was time to announce their relationship. He immediately bowed and said, "Disciple is here." "Ah! He is." The surroundings immediately became chaotic, and a wave of exclamations rang out. Everyone was stunned and looked at Bai Changchun and Yu Qianqiu in disbelief. These two are actually master and disciple? Oh my god! Many of the feudal lords were so scared that they broke out in cold sweat. Almost everyone had a part in hunting down Yu Qianqiu. Fortunately, that kid was lucky. If something really happened to him, it would be a big joke. Who was Bai Changchun? There was no need to doubt what would happen to him. Many people cursed Yu Qianqiu's 18 generations of ancestors in their hearts. He was forced to such a point, yet he still didn't reveal his backer. Even if he wanted to die, he didn't need to drag them down with him. Thank goodness, thank goodness, thank goodness this brat is still alive and kicking. The expressions of the soul formation stage feudal lords were rich and colorful. Now many people finally understood. No wonder this kid was always hanging out with Nongzhu. No wonder when Lanfeng began to support this kid after returning from the demon domain. No wonder this kid dared to run amok in the cultivation world and was not afraid of anything. It turned out that he had Bai Changchun behind him. No wonder he was qualified to stand beside Bai Changchun now. The people of the Huaxia cultivation world all stared at Yu Qianqiu with complicated and fiery expressions. His background was too powerful. When this truth was announced, it was like a bolt from the blue to everyone. All of them were stunned. Bai Changchun stared at the 4 major families and said slowly, "If the 4 families live their lives according to their own will, if they encounter any trouble in the future, they don't seek to live forever and don't seek to be illustrious. As long as it's within your ability, there's no need to force it. You can be a little more considerate. This can also be considered as fulfilling the relationship between me and the 4 families." Yu Qianqiu didn't give any guarantee. He just cupped his hands and said indifferently, "Rest assured, Master. This disciple will remember." Bai Changchun nodded slightly and waved to the 4 families. "There's nothing for you to do here. Go back quickly and live your own lives." The 4 families looked at each other. They were here to send off their ancestor. Now that the ancestor hadn't been sent off, how could they go back? Seeing that the 4 wanted to say something, Yu Qianqiu glanced at the soul formation stage feudal lords and said sternly, "For family heads, don't say anything more. Listen to Master's arrangements and go back immediately. Don't make Master angry. Otherwise, you will all be unfilial descendants." At this point, the 4 families didn't dare to disobey their ancestor. They all knelt again and said, "Yes, ancestor. Farewell, ancestor." Then, they stood up and flew around the various sects on their flying Dharma artifact. Under the envious gazes of the sects, they quickly flew back to Huaxia. At this time, there was a commotion among the sects in Huaxia. They must have secretly sent the same message. They all bowed to Bai Changchun and said, "Greetings, Senior Bai." Yu Qianqiu looked at these people speechlessly. He didn't know what they wanted to do. But at this time, he was suddenly stunned. Among the people bowing, there were 4 women in white standing on a flying Dharma artifact behind the people from Fuxian Island. 2 of them bowed and the other 2 stood straight. They didn't bow. They were very eye-catching in the crowd. Yu Qianqiu knew the person in the lead. It was the Moon Clan master, Jade Flower Fairy. Jade Flower Fairy was biting her lips and staring at them. Hua Rui, who was standing beside her, was also looking at them in astonishment. Yu Qianqiu guessed what they were looking at. He tilted his head and was slightly stunned. Suddenly, he understood everything. They were looking at none other than the elegant island master of the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest, the famous Mr. Nongzhu. Nongzhu also looked at Jade Flower Fairy with a dumbfounded expression. He probably didn't expect to meet Jade Flower Fairy on Xianxian Island. The man and the woman finally met each other. Yu Qianqiu immediately lowered his head and laughed. He wanted to find a chance to drag Jade Flower Fairy to the South Sea Purple Bamboo Forest to discuss Nongzhu. Now it seemed that there was no need at all. He didn't need to think about being the bad guy anymore. He just needed to watch the show. Seeing him laughing like this, Bai Changchun and the Nanming Patriarch looked at him with questioning eyes. When Yu Qianqiu noticed their eyes, he immediately felt that he had lost his composure. He coughed and straightened his expression. First, he sent a voice transmission to Bai Changchun, Master, the beautiful woman standing at the front is Zi's mother. Then, as if wanting the world to be in chaos, he sent a telepathic message to Grandmaster Nanming, Senior Nanming, the beautiful woman standing at the very front is an old flame that Senior Nongzhu secretly dumped. We haven't seen her for many years. Don't tell others that I said it. Chapter 710. Bai Changchun was already looking at Ziyi's mother. Ancestor Nanming asked in disbelief, Nongzhu's lover. Really? You're not lying to me, are you? Senior Nanming, what are you talking about? I'm famous for my credibility. Everyone in the cultivation world knows that. I've never lied in my life. That woman is the leader of the Moon Clan of Huaxia. People call her Fairy Qianghua. If you don't believe me, you can ask Senior Nongzhu. I promise I'm telling the truth. But don't tell him I said it, or he'll fight me to the death. Okay. I know. Fairy Qianghua, the leader of the Moon Clan of Huaxia. Ancestor Nanming tilted his head and looked at Nongzhu. Seeing her dumbfounded look, he immediately believed Yu Qianqiu's words. He rolled his eyes and shouted at Fairy Qianghua, is that the leader of the Moon Clan, Fairy Qianghua? His words shocked everyone. Everyone looked at Ancestor Nanming, wondering how he knew Fairy Qianghua. Because of Yunnan Tian and Hua Zongming's mistakes, the feudal lords of the various countries immediately let their imaginations run wild. Could it be that the Nanming old ancestor had also taken a fancy to this woman? Fairy Qianghua turned a deaf ear and kept biting her lips while looking at Nongzhu. On the other hand, Nongzhu was almost the same. Hua Rui came to her senses. She quickly pulled Fairy Qianghua and repeated what Ancestor Nanming said. People who could stand next to Bai Changchun were not ordinary people. They couldn't afford to offend them at all. However, her brother-in-law, the handsome and peerless brother-in-law, the brother-in-law named Xiao Yao, the brother-in-law who suddenly disappeared with a baby, she would never mistake him for someone else. That mortal from the mortal world was now standing at the peak of the cultivation world with Bai Changchun. Who exactly was he? Fairy Qianghua came back to her senses. She looked a bit sad. She turned and bowed slightly to Ancestor Nanming. I'm the leader of the Moon Clan, Qianghua. How do you know me? Forgive this junior's poor eyesight, but I don't think I've seen Senior before. Ancestor Nanming, who had been beaten up by Nongzhu in the dark because he had pinched Nongzhu's butt, was wearing a pair of red underpants. With his hands on his hips, he laughed out loud and said, I am the island master of Xian Island. In the cultivation world, people call me Ancestor Nanming. His arrogant and proud laughter echoed in all directions. All the sects in Huaxia were astonished. It turned out that this was Nanming ancestor, one of the 4 great men who was equally famous as Bai Changchun in the cultivation world. Qianghua Fairy was also slightly surprised. She bowed again and said, "Senior Nanming, it's my honor to meet you." Ancestor Nanming glanced at Nongzhu and saw that she was glaring at him. He was too lazy to pay attention to her and continued to laugh. "I've long heard of Fairy Qianghua's great name. I would like to do my best as a host and invite you to stay on Xian Island as a guest. Would you be willing to give me face?" Qianghua Fairy glanced at Nongzhu and replied solemnly, "How can I reject your invitation?" "Good, good, good." Ancestor Nanming laughed and said, "Good," 3 times in a row. Then he stopped talking. Almost everyone present could not wrap their heads around this and did not know what was going on. Bai Changchun, on the other hand, glanced at Yu Qianqiu who was standing obediently on the side. Nongzhu frowned and seemed to have figured something out in an instant. She stared angrily at Yu Qianqiu who looked like an honest man and asked him telepathically, "Yu Qianqiu, was it you who told Nanming ancestor Nanming?" Yu Qianqiu immediately denied it with telepathy, "No. Bullsh *t. Out of the 4 of us, only you and I have seen her. How could Nanming ancestor Nanming know that she is Qianghua Fairy, the head of the Moon Clan? Who else could it be if it wasn't you? Don't accuse a good person here. I was just wondering how Senior Nanming knew her." Yu Qianqiu replied, "Do you think it's possible that old ancestor Nanming really admired Fairy Viburnum's name for a long time? In addition to Fairy Viburnum's outstanding appearance, he guessed it immediately. Oh my god! Could it be that Senior Nanming has taken a fancy to Fairy Jasper Flower? Oh my god! Then you guys are..." Nongzhu's teeth hurt when she heard this. The muscles on her face twitched and a trace of panic flashed across her face. She turned to look at the smiling ancestor Nanming and found that he was staring at Qianghua Fairy with an expression that he had never shown to any woman before. The more she looked, the more she looked like Qianghua Fairy. It was really like what Yu Qianqiu had said. At this moment, Bai Changchun slowly floated up into the sky and turned to face the black whirlpool and the white fog that enveloped the East Holy Land. His body gradually rose into the sky. In an instant, everyone's eyes were focused on the rising figure in the green robe. They all knew what he was going to do. The blue sky, the blue sea, the East Pole opened. Bai Changchun slowly rose into the sky, ready to take the risk alone. Although the figure in the green robe was thin, it gave people a sense of heroism at this moment. Nongzhu and ancestor Nanming's expressions instantly became solemn, and they were vaguely worried. The lords of various countries looked a little expectant, as if they could not wait for Bai Changchun to leave quickly. As for Yu Qianqiu, he seemed to be a little indifferent. He only came here to see how his master entered the legendary East Holy Land. If it was not for the long talk that lasted through the night, Yu Qianqiu would probably also be worried about Bai Changchun. However, after the long talk that lasted through the night, he knew the details of Bai Changchun's cultivation, and basically, he was not worried anymore. Moreover, just in case, he even revealed the secret of the golden bead teleportation and even gave Bai Changchun a bunch of small silver beads so that if Bai Changchun encountered any danger that he could not solve, he could immediately contact him and he would immediately move Bai Changchun out. All the Huaxia cultivators looked at each other, and they all looked at Feng Xiangtian expectantly. Feng Xiangtian had no choice but to bite the bullet and shout loudly, "Senior Bai, the Huaxia cultivation world is in danger, please save us, Senior." Bai Changchun turned a deaf ear to him and continued to rise. He was already close to the center of the black vortex, swoosh. The lords of various countries stared at Feng Xiangtian like sharp blades, and they could not wait to poke a bloody hole in his body. What does this guy want to do? Does he want to summon Bai Changchun back to deal with us? Feng Xiangtian immediately felt chills all over his body when he was stared at by these people. However, the more he was at this juncture, the more he wanted to save himself. Just as he was about to call for help again, he saw a transparent light shield suddenly appear around Bai Changchun's body. Obviously, Bai Changchun was ready to go in. Senior Bai, the Huaxia cultivation world is in danger, please save us, senior. Feng Xiangtian shouted loudly again and again. However, Bai Changchun did not care about him at all. Even the lords of various countries could not be bothered to reason with him for the time being. All their attention was focused on the sky, and they could not take their eyes off him. Even with Bai Changchun's cultivation, he had released protective aura to protect his body. It could be seen that he did not dare to underestimate the situation and had made thorough preparations. In the rapidly spinning black vortex, dense electric snakes shuttled back and forth like a net, like a monster opening its huge mouth to devour, staring at the green-robed figure floating in the air. Because of the sudden appearance of Bai Changchun in the wind gap, the originally whirling black vortex suckers suddenly made the invisible wind pillar that had no resistance become chaotic, almost turning into tangible wind blades, whipping at Bai Changchun's protective aura chi. Woo woo. Swoosh swoosh. A shrill and strange sound appeared in the sky, like a giant beast opening its fangs with lightning and roaring. Suddenly, Bai Changchun's figure shot toward the center of the black vortex like a green meteor. Everyone's eyes could hardly react, and they saw the figure crash into the center of the black vortex in the blink of an eye. In an instant, rapid flashes of lightning and rumbles of thunder appeared in the black vortex, as if the intruding figure had created a wave that resembled lightning. Then, the movement gradually calmed down, and Bai Changchun's figure completely disappeared in the black vortex. Everyone present held their breaths with rapt attention. No one even breathed loudly. Although they saw Bai Changchun enter, they still stared fixedly at the black whirlpool with lightning bolts swirling around it. After a long time, it was estimated that the 6 hours of the opening of the Holy East Land was over. The black vortex embedded in the white fog gradually shrank, and the lightning in it shone with green light. Finally, along with the shrinking black vortex, it disappeared in the vast white fog. In an instant, the world returned to normal, and the rapid spinning sound disappeared. There was only the sound of the sea breeze blowing and the sound of the waves hitting the rocky shore. Everyone came back to their senses and looked at each other, especially the lords of the various countries. All of them let out a sigh of relief and looked at each other with an irrepressible smile of excitement. The number one expert in the world who had suppressed everyone for many years was finally gone. The terrifying expert who made everyone tremble with fear was finally gone. The god of death finally went to the Holy East Land where he would never return. The stone that had been pressing on everyone's hearts for many years was finally removed. The haze that had shrouded their hearts for many years was finally blown away. Breathing in the free sea breeze of Xian Island, they could feel a trace of sweetness. Pei Fong's eyes flickered as he looked around. After making eye contact with Qi Zhejuan and Ouyangde, Pei Fong couldn't help but let out an arrogant ga laughter towards the sky. The two of them also laughed heartily. Their laughter echoed in the sky above Xian Island. The time that belonged to them had finally arrived. Bai Changchun was gone, and Yin Baikong was dead. As long as the three of them united, Bing Qingzi and Hu Changshe would not be difficult to deal with. As long as they took care of these two. Although Wen Lanfeng's cultivation was high, he was actually the easiest person to deal with. As long as they spent some time and played some tricks, they would not have to worry about not being able to deal with him. As long as they took care of these three people, from now on, no one in this world would be able to restrict their freedom. How could they not be happy when they thought of the day where they could freely roam the world after cultivating for a lifetime? The people of the Chinese cultivation world already felt that the situation was not good. They all regretted coming here. Now, it was tantamount to sending sheep into a tiger's mouth. All of them started to beat a retreat in their hearts and slowly retreated, hoping that the lords of the various countries would not bother with them now that they were in high spirits. This person could always come up with childish ideas to comfort me when he was on the verge of despair. Actually, most of the spirit-severing realm lords were indeed in high spirits and did not have any thoughts of taking care of them now. However, when Yen Ji glanced over, his killing intent instantly rose. He immediately shouted angrily, "All of you, stop." His proud disciple had died in the Chinese cultivation world. He had long since lost his good impression of the Chinese cultivators. How could he let them go now? Chapter 711. Before he finished speaking, Yen Ji's figure had already disappeared from where he was and blocked the retreat of the Huaxia sections. He floated in the air with a ferocious expression and sneered, "Want to run? Since you've delivered yourselves to me, why don't you all stay here?" The small sects that had been standing at the back immediately became the first to retreat. Some of them even almost bumped into Yen Ji, who had suddenly appeared. They were so frightened that they quickly retreated with their flying celestial devices. The Huaxia sects were like birds startled by the mere twang of a bowstring. They were all in a mess, huddling together and taking unnecessary precautions. Seeing this scene, many of the feudal lords burst into laughter. Yen Ji was obviously very proud of his ability to scare the Huaxia sects like this. He pointed at the sect that almost bumped into him and said arrogantly, "How dare you talk back to me? All of you kneel and kowtow to apologize, or I'll start with you first." There were only 3 people standing on the small flying celestial device. Hearing this, all of them were extremely indignant. However, they were no match for Yen Ji, who was a legendary soul formation expert. They might not be able to escape today. Nongzhu and the great ancestor of Nanming silently looked at the wild lords of the various countries and didn't say anything. These people had been suppressed by Bai Changchun for many years. Now that Bai Changchun had left, they would probably vent their pent-up anger on these Huaxia cultivators. It was understandable. But then again, did it matter to them whether the Huaxia cultivators lived or died? For those who struggled in the cultivation world, life and death were all decided in an instant. Life and death were not important. This was actually a part of cultivation. It all depended on whether one could break through safely. However, Yu Qianqiu's expression was not so good. He had long known that these Huaxia cultivators would definitely be unlucky to break through at this time. Otherwise, Bai Changchun wouldn't have let the 4 clans leave first. There were some things that Bai Changchun was well aware of. The world was full of misfortunes. Once he left, it would be useless to worry about what would happen after him. For the sake of his relationship with the 4 great families, he had stayed for a while and bought time for the 4 great families to leave. He had already done his best. Yu Qianqiu was well aware of this, which was why he helped Bai Changchun urge the 4 families to leave. Although he himself did not have a good impression of the people of the Chinese cultivation world, and after the long talk with Bai Changchun that night, his view of the situation was no longer limited to the Chinese cultivation world, but the whole world. If Yen Ji were to kill someone, he might weigh the pros and cons and turn a blind eye to it in order to protect himself. However, Yen Ji actually made a Chinese cultivator kneel and accept the humiliation. After all, he was born in the Huaxia cultivation world. It was difficult for him to watch the Huaxia cultivators being humiliated before their death. He had the urge to stand up for the Huaxia cultivators. This kind of impulsive nature was called bloodthirstiness. In his previous life, it was because of this kind of uncontrollable bloodthirstiness that ultimately led to the tragic end of his fate. Yu Qianqiu clenched his fists, but in the end, he still endured it. Nongzhu slightly tilted her head and glanced at him. At this moment, one of the 3 people on the flying celestial device that almost hit Yen Ji suddenly turned around and shouted, "Yu Qianqiu, I am Tu Yanfeng, an elder of the Huaxia Imperial Sword Sect." Do you remember what you said to me in the Cultivation Alliance? Everyone stared at Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu and the ancestor of Nanming also looked at him curiously, wondering what on earth Yu Qianqiu had said to him. Many Huaxia cultivators remembered that when Yu Qianqiu left the Cultivation Alliance, he had promised Tu Yanfeng that if the Imperial Sword sect encountered any trouble, he could use the name of Yu Qianqiu. Tu Yanfeng was a straightforward person. Otherwise, he would not have clashed with Yu Qianqiu even though he knew that he was no match for him. At this critical moment, he still spoke tactfully. Although he wanted to beg Yu Qianqiu, he only reminded Yu Qianqiu if he still remembered what he had said in the past. If Yu Qianqiu had forgotten, he would not say anything more. He just wanted to try with a glimmer of hope. Yu Qianqiu was stunned. He stared at Tu Yanfeng's face and tried to recognize him. He immediately remembered what Tu Yanfeng said when he pretended to be generous and let him go. Although he clearly saw Yan Ji staring at him with a pair of cold eyes that were filled with killing intent, he still smiled. He cupped his hands and said, "So it's Elder Tu from the Imperial Sword School. Since we're old acquaintances, please come and have a chat." Before Tu Yanfeng could reply, the head of the Imperial Sword sect had already flown over on his flying celestial device and floated in front of Yu Qianqiu. Tu Yanfeng glanced at the head slightly and looked a little embarrassed. At the head's greeting, the three of them jumped down, put away their flying celestial devices, and bowed to Ancestor Nanming, Nongzhu, and Yu Qianqiu. Ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu just looked at them expressionlessly and had no intention of paying attention to them. Instead, Yu Qianqiu cupped his hands and said with a smile, "Elder Tu, I haven't seen you for many years. How have you been?" Tu Yanfeng looked a little ashamed. He lowered his head and cupped his hands, not saying anything. Yu Qianqiu nodded with a smile. To be honest, this kind of person who was too ashamed was not suitable to live in the cultivation world, but he admired him. He. Yan Ji stared at them and sneered. He squinted his eyes and asked, "Yu Qianqiu, what do you mean? Do you want to protect them from me?" Yu Qianqiu's gaze slowly shifted from Tu Yanfeng to Yan Ji. He asked in a neutral tone, "From what you're saying, could it be that you want to kill them from my hands?" The meaning of his words could not be clearer. It was obvious that he wanted to protect the people of the Imperial Sword School. Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming frowned at the same time. Among the feudal lords, many people were already laughing mockingly. They were laughing at Yu Qianqiu for overestimating himself. Yan Ji immediately threw his head back and laughed loudly. "You want to protect them? I haven't even settled the score of killing this old man's disciple, but you've already delivered yourself to me." Yu Qianqiu said disdainfully, "Old man, it's not that I'm looking down on you, but I'm standing right here. If you have the ability, come and try to touch me." Presumptuous. It's time to settle the score between us. Hua Zongming and Pu Taidong rose into the air and stood at the same level as the people on the mountain peak. Although their words were directed at Yu Qianqiu, they were also staring at Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming. Their meaning was clear. They wanted to suppress Ancestor Nanming and Nongzhu, preventing them from interfering with Yan Ji's killing of Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu and Ancestor Nanming's faces darkened. They looked at each other and nodded slightly. They were ready to protect Yu Qianqiu. Nongzhu, in particular, took out the bamboo flute from her waist and held it in her hand. Her whole body was bursting with fighting spirit. She could not tolerate someone bullying Bai Changchun's disciple. As soon as he left, seeing that someone was cooperating with him, Yan Ji was full of smiles. He shook his head and said, "Yu Qianqiu. Yu Qianqiu. I wanted to spare your life today for the sake of Bai Changchun. Who knew that you would come to me to court death? Bai Changchun is not here anymore. Who do you think you are? Give me your life." With a loud shout, Yan Ji turned into a shadow and directly rushed over. He was as fast as lightning, carrying the momentum of wind and thunder. He arrived in the blink of an eye. Almost at the same time, Nongzhu shouted angrily, "Nan Ming, protect Yu Qianqiu." He had already rushed out. With a loud bang, the two phantoms collided and directly collided together. Obviously, Nongzhu's cultivation was higher. Yan Ji let out a muffled groan, and his body was directly knocked back. Hua Zhongming and Pu Taidong looked at each other and nodded solemnly. They both shot toward Nongzhu in the air. In an instant, Nongzhu split into two figures in the air and faced the two of them respectively. Bang, bang. A strong bang set off a raging airwave, forcing the Huaxia cultivators to almost lose their balance on their flying celestial devices. All of them stared at the duel between the two masters of the soul formation stage in horror. They were too powerful. The aftershock of the fight was not something they could bear. Holding a golden net in his hand, Nanming Ancestor moved to the side of Yu Qianqiu and watched the fight in the sky with a red face. Yu Qianqiu's eyes were like an owl. Two balls of black flames were jumping rapidly in his eyes, and the killing intent on his face could not be suppressed. The three people who were fighting fiercely turned into two messy shadows. Bang, bang, bang. They directly flew up into the sky. The lords of the various countries watched the fight with interest. It seemed that they wanted to see who would be the unlucky one. Pei Fang, in particular, had a beaming smile on his face. Yan Ji, who was knocked away, stopped retreating. He looked down at his chest, where a very conspicuous footprint was left. He raised his hand angrily and wiped off a trace of blood at the corner of his mouth. A shiny black whip appeared in his hand. He stared at the sky and shouted angrily, "Nongzhu, today is the day you die." His figure shot up into the sky. "Just you?" Nongzhu snorted disdainfully. Suddenly, hundreds of Nongzhu appeared in the sky and surrounded Hua Zhongming, Pu Taidong, and Yan Ji. The four people fought fiercely and crazily in the sky. The shadows intertwined in the sky, fighting back and forth. Loud noises were heard constantly, and the airwaves covered the sky and the earth. Those whose cultivation was below the deification stage could not tell who the four people were. In the angry rebuke, Nongzhu actually fought evenly against the three people. At this time, the three people in the sky were fighting against Nongzhu, but it seemed that Nongzhu had surrounded the three of them. Others might not see the reason, but the lords of the deification stage from various countries looked at each other in dismay. They all seemed to find it hard to believe. Because they could see that Nongzhu was fighting against three people, and she actually had the upper hand. Many people could not associate the previous Nongzhu, who did not do proper work, with the current Nongzhu who was fierce and fierce. It was really unexpected. The four people in the fierce battle were all at the middle stage of deification, but Nongzhu was not at a disadvantage against three people. Pei Fang squinted at the sky and said, "Nongzhu's transfiguration transposition skill is really worthy of its reputation. Coupled with her good cultivation, I'm afraid Hua Zhongming and the other two people can't take advantage of her. It seems that Nongzhu is not far from breaking through the final stage of deification." When he said the last sentence, there was a hint of gloominess in his tone. Qi Zhoujuan said expressionlessly, "It's a pity that Mu Sang, Miao Hanyuan, and Xu Xin are not here. Otherwise, we can see if Nongzhu can fight against 6 people with her transfiguration transposition skill." Pei Fang chuckled and said, "Mu Sang and Miao Hanyuan will naturally help when they are here. However, Xu Xin seems to be in the same boat as Nongzhu. I don't know who will help who." His words immediately made the lords of various countries laugh. You're tuning into the LoveLore Library YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.